When my husband of 37 years reached for my hand in his final moments, whispering, "I'm sorry," with his last breath, I thought grief would be the heaviest burden I'd carry. 3 days later, as I stood beside his mahogany casket draped in white lilies, I discovered betrayal cuts deeper than death itself. That's when I realized life doesn't just break your heart. It puts the pieces in a blender and serves them back to you with a garnish of humiliation. If you're watching this, subscribe now and comment if you've ever had someone try to erase your existence while you were still breathing. Trust me, what happened next makes the worst soap opera look like a children's bedtime story. The funeral home smelled of dying roses and false sympathy. I stood there in my black dress, the one Edward always said made me look elegant, greeting people who claimed to share my grief. My fingers were numb from accepting handshakes and half-hearted hugs. The diamond wedding band on my left hand felt suddenly heavy, like it was weighing me down rather than anchoring me. "Martha, you're holding up so well," whispered Claudia Wilson, my next-door neighbor of 15 years. Her eyes darted around the room as she squeezed my arm. "Everyone's talking about how dignified you've been through all of this." The way she emphasized this made my stomach clench. Something in her tone suggested she knew more than she was saying. "Through all of what, exactly?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Claudia's face flushed. "Oh, just Edward's illness. The suddenness of it all." But her eyes told a different story. Before I could press further, the funeral director approached, his face a practiced mask of somber professionalism. "Mrs. Harrington, we're ready to begin the service whenever you are." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The last 5 months had been a blur of hospital rooms, medication schedules, and watching my husband of nearly 4 decades wither away from the robust businessman he'd once been to a frail shell who could barely recognize me on his bad days. The cancer had been swift and merciless, just like the woman who entered the funeral home at that exact moment. She appeared in the doorway like an apparition in black silk. Tall, slender, perhaps 30 years younger than me, with chestnut hair cascading over shoulders that had never known the weight of raising 3 children or managing a household while your husband built his empire. Around her neck gleamed a sapphire pendant I recognized immediately. I had watched Edward purchase it at Tiffany's for our 25th anniversary. A collective hush fell over the room. Even the funeral director seemed momentarily paralyzed. I felt dozens of eyes shifting between this stranger and myself. "Who is that?" I whispered to Claudia, though something cold and terrible was already spreading through my chest. Claudia's fingers dug into my arm. "Martha, I thought you knew. That's Veronica Winters. She worked at Edward's company. In marketing, I believe." The woman, Veronica, scanned the room with the calculated confidence of someone who knew exactly the impact her presence would have. When her eyes met mine, there wasn't a trace of shame. Instead, her crimson lips curved into what could only be described as a smirk. She began moving through the crowd, accepting condolences as if she had every right to be there, as if she belonged. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the light with every theatrical gesture of grief she made. I recognized that bracelet too. It had been my Christmas gift 3 years ago. My son Michael appeared at my side, his face tense. "Mom, do you want me to ask her to leave?" I straightened my spine and shook my head.
"No.
Let her stay." "But Mom," I said, "let her stay." My voice was steel. "I want to see what she does." The service began. I sat in the front row with my children, Michael, Rebecca, and David, while that woman took a seat directly across the aisle, as if she were family. Throughout the eulogies, I felt her eyes on me, assessing, calculating. Our minister spoke of Edward's dedication to his family, his business acumen, his generosity to our community. With each praise, I noticed Veronica's posture stiffen, as if she were preparing to stand up and challenge these remembrances with her own version of the man I thought I knew. When it was my turn to speak, I rose on trembling legs and made my way to the podium. The notes I had prepared the night before seemed inadequate now, in the face of this new reality. I looked out at the sea of faces, friends, family, colleagues. all watching me with expressions ranging from sympathy to morbid curiosity. Edward was. I began, my voice catching. I cleared my throat and started again. Edward was complicated, as we all are. He built a successful business from nothing. He provided generously for his family. He loved sailing and Hemingway novels and could never resist a good Manhattan. A few gentle laughs rippled through the crowd. We had 37 years together. Some wonderful, some difficult. But they were ours. I paused, gathering my courage. Then I looked directly at Veronica. At least, I thought they were ours. A murmur ran through the gathering. Veronica's smirk faltered for just a moment. But I stand here today not to speak of betrayal, but of forgiveness. Because in his final days, Edward asked for my forgiveness. And I gave it. This wasn't entirely true, but I wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction of knowing how Edward's final confession had shattered me. Whatever else he was the father of my children, and for 37 years, he was my husband. I stepped down from the podium and returned to my seat, my heart pounding. Rebecca squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't sure if she was crying for her father or for the public humiliation her mother was enduring. After the service, as people filed past the casket for final goodbyes, I noticed Veronica hanging back, waiting. When nearly everyone had paid their respects, she approached. The room had emptied enough that her words would not be overheard by many, but still public enough that she wouldn't be perceived as hiding. She stood before Edward's body, one manicured hand resting possessively on the edge of the casket. "We were going to sail the Mediterranean together," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "He promised me once you were out of the picture." I felt my children tense beside me. David half rose from his seat, but I placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Let her have her moment," I whispered. Veronica turned then and walked directly to where I sat. The sapphire pendant gleamed against her skin, a blue flame of mockery. "He would have left you, you know," she said, her voice low but clear. "If he hadn't gotten sick. We had plans." I met her gaze steadily. "And yet, here we are." Something flashed in her eyes, anger, perhaps, or frustration that I wasn't crumbling before her. She leaned closer, her expensive perfume, another gift I recognized, enveloping me like a toxic cloud. "Pack your bags, old woman," she hissed. "His fortune is all mine." Michael stood up, so quickly his chair nearly toppled. "That's enough. You need to leave. Now." Veronica straightened, adjusting the sapphire pendant with deliberate slowness. "I'm just paying my respects to the man I loved." She looked down at me with contempt. "The man who loved me." "The man who was married to my mother," Rebecca interjected, her voice shaking with rage. Veronica smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "For now, yes. But things change after the will reading." Edward made sure of that. She turned on her heel and walked away, the sound of her stilettos echoing on the hardwood floor like the ticking of a clock. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back. "I'll see you tomorrow, Martha. Wear something nice. It'll be your last day as Mrs. Harrington in anything but name." After she left, the room seemed to exhale collectively. The funeral director approached, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and concern. "Mrs. Harrington, I am so terribly sorry about that incident. If I had known—" "It's fine," I said, though nothing was fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. "Please, let's just finish here. I'd like to go home." Later that evening, after the last casserole-bearing neighbor had left and my children had finally stopped hovering, I sat alone in the kitchen of the home Edward and I had shared for 35 years. The house felt cavernous now, filled with shadows and memories that seemed to shift and change before my eyes. Had he brought her here when I visited my sister in Phoenix last spring? Had they laughed at me while drinking from our crystal glasses? I pulled out the letter Edward's lawyer had sent 3 days after his death. The will reading was scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow at the offices of Benson, Wright, and Associates. According to the letter, my presence was especially requested as the primary beneficiary. Primary, not sole. The words seemed to mock me now, in light of Veronica's confidence. What had Edward done? After decades of building a life together, after I had sacrificed my own career to raise our children and support his ambitions, had he really planned to leave me with nothing but humiliation? I reached for the phone and dialed Rebecca's number. "Mom? Is everything okay?" Her voice was thick with concern. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "Something discreet." "Of course, anything." "I need you to find out everything you can about Veronica Winters. Where she worked, how long she knew your father, what their relationship was. Everything." There was a pause. "Mom, are you sure you want to know all that?" "I'm not going into that while reading blind, Rebecca. I need to know what I'm facing." Another pause. "I'll see what I can find out. David might be able to help. He has a friend in HR at Dad's company." "Thank you." I hesitated. "And Rebecca? Don't tell Michael yet. You know how he is. He'll want to confront her directly, and that's the last thing we need right now." After hanging up, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and opened Edward's closet. His suits hung in a neat row, organized by color as I had always done for him. I ran my fingers along the sleeves, remembering how he looked in each one. The navy pinstripe he wore to our son's wedding. The charcoal gray he favored for board meetings. The black one he wore on our last anniversary dinner. Behind the suits, tucked in the back corner where he thought I wouldn't notice, was a small leather duffel bag. I pulled it out and unzipped it. Inside were a few folded shirts, casual clothes I didn't recognize, toiletries, and a small velvet box. My hands trembled as I opened it. A diamond ring gleamed up at me, far larger and more ostentatious than the modest one he'd given me all those years ago when we were just starting out. There was a small card tucked inside the lid. In Edward's handwriting, "For V, to new beginnings." I closed the box and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. The evidence of his betrayal was no longer just the word of a spiteful mistress. It was tangible, undeniable. He had been planning to leave, to start over with her. But then cancer had its own plans. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it and pushed the bag back into its hiding place. Then I went to my own closet and pulled out the black Chanel suit I'd bought for our daughter's law school graduation. Edward had complained about the expense at the time, calling it frivolous. I wondered now how many thousands he had spent on Veronica while criticizing my one indulgence. I laid the suit out for tomorrow. Veronica wanted me to dress nicely for my humiliation. I would oblige. But I wouldn't go quietly into whatever future Edward and his mistress had planned for me. Morning arrived with a pounding rain that matched my mood. I dressed carefully, applying makeup with more attention than I had in years. If I was to be publicly discarded, I would at least look my best for it. My children arrived to drive me to the lawyer's office. Michael, always protective, hadn't stopped scowling since the funeral. Rebecca, the pragmatic one, had brought a notebook and pen. David, the youngest and most sensitive, kept squeezing my hand as if I might shatter. "Did you find anything?" I whispered to Rebecca as we waited at a traffic light. She nodded slightly. "We'll talk after," she murmured, with a meaningful glance toward Michael in the driver's seat. The offices of Benson, Wright, and Associates occupied half a floor in one of the glass towers downtown that Edward's construction company had built 15 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me as we rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The receptionist directed us to a conference room where several people were already gathered. Edward's business partner, Thomas Reed, nodded solemnly to me from across the table. Beside him sat their company's CFO, Alan Mercer, who couldn't quite meet my eye. I wondered what he knew. And there, of course, was Veronica, dressed in a form-fitting black dress that was more appropriate for a cocktail party than a reading. The sapphire pendant still gleamed at her throat. She offered me a smile that was pure venom. "Martha, so glad you could make it." She patted the empty chair beside her. "Come sit by me. We should get to know each other better." "I'll sit with my children. Thank you," I replied, taking a seat on the opposite side of the table. James Benson, Edward's lawyer for over 20 years and supposedly our friend, entered carrying a thick folder. He nodded to me with what seemed like genuine sympathy. "Thank you all for coming. Before we begin, I want to express my personal condolences to the Harrington family. Edward was not just a client, but a friend. He opened the folder and adjusted his glasses. As is customary, I'll read the will in its entirety, and then we can address any questions.
My heart hammered in my chest.
Beside me, David reached for my hand. Edward James Harrington, being of sound mind. James began the formal preamble. I found I couldn't focus on the words. Instead, I watched Veronica's face. She sat with the confident posture of someone who already knew the outcome, occasionally glancing at me with poorly disguised triumph. James cleared his throat and continued to the substance of the will. To my business partner of 30 years, Thomas Reed, I leave my collection of first edition Hemingway novels and my gratitude for your friendship. Thomas nodded, his expression solemn. To my children, Michael, Rebecca, and David Harrington, I leave the following. To Michael, my vintage sailing boat, Second Wind, and the sum of $200,000. Michael's grip on the armrest tightened. To Rebecca, my minority shares in Eastlake Properties and $200,000. Rebecca scribbled something in her notebook. To David, my collection of watches and $200,000. David's hand trembled in mine. I noticed Veronica shifting in her seat, her smile faltering slightly. This wasn't going as she had expected. Regarding the remainder of my estate, James continued, including my majority ownership of Harrington Construction, all real estate holdings, investment accounts, and personal property not otherwise specified. The room seemed to hold its breath. I closed my eyes, preparing for the blow. All assets, accounts, and properties are left solely to my lawful wife, Martha Elizabeth Harrington. My eyes flew open. Across the table, Veronica's face had frozen in disbelief. James wasn't finished. Furthermore, I include a specific directive. To the woman who dishonored my marriage, Veronica Winters, you inherit nothing but shame. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Veronica shot to her feet, her face contorted with rage. This is impossible, she shrieked. He changed the will. We discussed it. He promised me. James looked at her coldly over his glasses. Ms. Winters, I assure you this is the legally binding will of Edward Harrington, signed and witnessed 3 weeks before his death. If you have documentation suggesting otherwise, I would be interested to see it. Veronica's eyes darted wildly around the room. He told me everything would be mine. The house, the company's shares, everything. He was leaving her. She jabbed a finger in my direction. Perhaps he misled you, James said calmly. No. She slammed her hands on the table. I have proof. I have emails, text messages. None of which constitute a legal will, James interrupted. Now, if you'll excuse us, the rest of this reading concerns family matters. Veronica turned to me then, her beautiful face twisted with hatred. You manipulated him when he was sick. You took advantage. Ms. Winters. James's voice was steel. Please remove yourself from these proceedings, or I will be forced to call security. For a moment, I thought she might physically attack me across the table. Then, with a strangled cry, she snatched her purse and stormed toward the door. She paused there, turning back to fix me with a venomous stare. This isn't over, Martha. Not by a long shot. You may have won the money, but I had his heart. Remember that while you're sleeping in our bed. The door slammed behind her with such force that the artwork on the walls trembled. James cleared his throat. My apologies for that unpleasantness. Shall we continue? The remainder of the will reading passed in a blur. There were charitable donations, provisions for long-time employees, instructions for the company's future direction. Through it all, I sat in stunned silence. Edward hadn't abandoned me financially after all, but the victory felt hollow in the face of his emotional betrayal. Afterward, in the privacy of James's office, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. When did he change it? The will. James removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He didn't change it, Martha. This was always his will. He updated it regularly as his assets grew, but you were always his sole beneficiary apart from the children's bequests. I frowned, but Veronica seemed so certain. Edward came to see me about 3 weeks before he passed, James said carefully. He was troubled. He asked me to add that specific exclusion clause naming Ms. Winters. He also asked about the legal implications if he were to divorce you. My heart clenched. So, he was planning to leave me. James shook his head. I don't know what he was planning, Martha. I only know what he did. And what he did was ensure you and your children were provided for. As we left the lawyer's office, Rebecca pulled me aside while Michael and David went ahead to bring the car around. Mom, there's something you should know about Veronica Winters, she said in a low voice. She's worked at Dad's company for just over a year. Before that, she was at Carlton Industries. Edward's biggest competitor, I murmured. Rebecca nodded. And there's more. David's friend in HR said she specifically requested to be assigned to projects Dad was overseeing. She maneuvered her way into his orbit. You think she targeted him deliberately? I think it's worth looking into. Rebecca hesitated. There's a rumor she was involved with Carlton's CEO before she moved to Dad's company. She has a pattern of attaching herself to powerful men. Before I could respond, Michael pulled up with the car. We drove home in relative silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The rain had stopped, leaving the world looking washed and unnaturally bright. As we turned onto our street, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front of our house, a sleek black Mercedes. Standing beside it, looking up at our home with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, was Thomas Reed, Edward's business partner. What's Thomas doing here? David asked as we pulled into the driveway. I have no idea, I replied. Thomas approached as we got out of the car. He looked haggard, older than his 60 years. Martha, I need to speak with you, he said without preamble. Privately, if possible. I glanced at my children. Whatever you have to say, Thomas, you can say in front of my family. He shook his head. Not this. Please, Martha. It's important. Something in his expression gave me pause. I turned to my children. Why don't you all go inside? I'll join you in a few minutes. They reluctantly complied, though Michael lingered on the porch, watching us with suspicious eyes. What is it, Thomas? I asked once we were alone. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. I should have told you sooner. Before the funeral, before all of this. But Edward was my friend, and I thought, he broke off, shaking his head. I was wrong to stay silent. Told me what? Thomas looked me directly in the eye. Veronica Winters wasn't just having an affair with Edward. She was spying on him, on the company. I stared at him, uncomprehending. Spying?
What are you talking about?
We're bidding on the Westlake development project. It's huge, Martha, worth millions. Game-changing for the company. Edward was leading the bid strategy. He lowered his voice. 2 weeks ago, I discovered someone had accessed the confidential bid files and financial projections. When I tracked the security breach, it led back to Veronica's company login. Did you confront Edward? Thomas's face darkened. I tried. He refused to believe it. Said I was jealous, that I resented his happiness. We had the worst fight of our 30-year partnership.
He paused.
The next day, he collapsed at the office. Never made it back in. I felt suddenly cold despite the summer heat. Are you saying she had something to do with his death? No. Thomas shook his head vigorously. The cancer was real, but I think she was using him, Martha. Using his feelings for her to get insider information. For what purpose? That's what I'm afraid of. The bids for Westlake are due next week. If Carlton Industries somehow underbids us by just the right margin. I thought about what Rebecca had just told me about Veronica's connection to Carlton. We need to stop her. Thomas nodded. I've been trying to gather evidence, but she's clever. Nothing concrete yet. He glanced toward the house. I know this is a terrible time, but with Edward gone, you're the majority shareholder now. We need to act quickly. My mind was reeling. First a funeral, then a will reading, and now corporate espionage? It was too much to process. I need time to think, Thomas. This is all happening so fast. Of course. He reached into his pocket and handed me a business card. This is my private number.
Call me anytime.
Day or night. He hesitated. And Martha? Be careful. Veronica Winters isn't just a heartbroken mistress. She's dangerous. As Thomas drove away, I stood on the driveway looking up at the house Edward and I had built together. I thought about the secret duffel bag in his closet, the sapphire pendant around Veronica's neck, the confident way she had threatened me at the funeral. If Thomas was right, this wasn't just about a betrayed marriage. It was about a company that employed hundreds of people, including many who had been loyal to Edward for decades. It was about his legacy. I walked slowly up to the porch where Michael was waiting, his expression concerned. "Mom, what did Thomas want?" I squared my shoulders. He was warning me. "It seems your father's mistress may have been after more than just his heart." Inside, Rebecca and David were in the kitchen making coffee. I sat at the island and told them everything Thomas had shared. "So, she's a corporate spy?" David's eyes were wide. "Like in a movie?" "It would explain her confidence at the funeral and the will reading," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "If her real goal was company information, not Dad's money, she might have already gotten what she wanted." Michael paced the kitchen. "We should go to the police." "With what evidence?" I asked. "Right now, all we have is Thomas's suspicion about a security breach. Then we need to find evidence," Rebecca said decisively. "Mom, you're the majority shareholder now. You have every right to initiate an internal investigation." I thought about it. "Wouldn't that alert Veronica that we're onto her?" "Not if we're careful," Rebecca replied. "Besides, she already showed her cards at the will reading. She's furious and humiliated. People make mistakes when they're emotional." I sipped my coffee, trying to organize my thoughts. Tomorrow I'll go to Edward's office. It's time I took an active interest in the company he built. Later that night, after my children had finally gone home despite their reluctance to leave me alone, I sat in Edward's study surrounded by framed photos of our life together. Our wedding day, the children's births, family vacations, professional accomplishments, a carefully curated visual history that gave no hint of the deception that had colored our final year. I opened his laptop. I knew his password. It was our anniversary date, and began searching through his emails. There were hundreds from Veronica, dating back almost a year. I couldn't bring myself to read them all, but I sampled enough to piece together the progression of their relationship. The early ones were professional, then flirtatious, then intimate. The most recent ones contained references to their future together. "I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore," she had written just 3 weeks before his diagnosis. "Just a little longer, my love, and then we'll be free." What had she meant by free? Free of me? Or free of something else? I was about to close the laptop when I noticed a folder in his email labeled Simply V. Inside were dozens of emails he hadn't sent. Drafts, apparently. I clicked on the most recent one, dated just days before his final hospitalization. "Veronica, I've spoken with James about changing my will. He advises against it given my condition, but I'm determined to provide for you, as we discussed. However, something has been troubling me. Thomas came to me with concerns about the Westlake bid information. He seems to think someone accessed the files inappropriately. I know it couldn't have been you, but I need to ask directly, did you use my computer that day when I was at chemo? I can't remember if I logged out properly. I love you, but I need to protect my company too. Please call me when you get this. Edward." My hands were shaking as I closed the email. He had never sent it. Had he lost his nerve? Or had the progression of his illness prevented him from confronting her? I checked the date of the draft against Edward's medical records, which I'd kept meticulously throughout his illness. That day he had been rushed to the hospital with complications. He never returned home afterward, spending his final weeks in hospice care. Had he suspected her after all? Had he been planning to confront her, only to run out of time? I continued searching and found another folder labeled Westlake. Inside were detailed financial projections, architectural plans, and a comprehensive bid strategy for what appeared to be a massive commercial development project. This must be what Thomas was worried about, the information Veronica had allegedly stolen. I was copying the files to a flash drive when I heard a noise from somewhere in the house, a soft thud, like something being set down carefully. I froze, listening intently. It was nearly midnight. No one should be here. Slowly, I closed the laptop and rose from the desk. The house was dark except for the small lamp in the study. I considered calling 911, but hesitated.
What if it was just the house settling?
I'd be embarrassed to have police officers arrive for nothing. I picked up the heavy crystal paperweight from Edward's desk and moved quietly to the study door. The hallway was dark. I strained my ears, but heard nothing further. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone there?" Silence. I was about to convince myself I'd imagined it when I heard another sound, the unmistakable click of the front door closing. Someone had been in my house, and now they were gone. Heart pounding, I rushed to the front door and locked it, then quickly moved through the house, securing all the windows and the back door. Only then did I call Michael. "Mom? What's wrong?" His voice was thick with sleep. "I think someone was in the house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I heard noises and then the front door. I'm coming over. Call 911 right now. Don't touch anything." 20 minutes later, 2 police officers were walking through my house while Michael hovered protectively beside me. "We don't see any signs of forced entry, ma'am," one officer said. "Are you sure you locked everything before you went to bed?" I hesitated. In my distraction after returning from the will reading, had I forgotten to lock the door? It was possible. I thought I did, but I've been under a lot of stress. My husband just passed away. The officer's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss. It's common to be more aware of noises when you're alone in a house for the first time. But we'll file a report and have patrols keep an eye on your street tonight." After they left, Michael insisted on staying. "I'm taking the guest room, and I don't want to hear any arguments." Too exhausted and unnerved to protest, I agreed. But as I lay in bed, alone in the room I had shared with Edward for decades, I couldn't shake the feeling that the intrusion had been real, and that it was connected to everything else. Edward's affair, Veronica's threats, Thomas's warnings about corporate espionage. If Veronica had been spying for Carlton Industries, and if she believed Edward had left her something in his will, perhaps information or access she still needed, might she have come looking for it tonight? The thought sent a chill through me. I had dismissed her parting shot at the will reading as the empty threat of a scorned woman. But what if it was more? What if this truly wasn't over? I thought about the flash drive now hidden in my jewelry box, containing copies of the Westlake files. Tomorrow I would take it to Thomas and see if together we could determine what Veronica might be after. And, perhaps more importantly, what she might already have. As I finally drifted toward an uneasy sleep, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number. Enjoying your victory, Martha? Don't get too comfortable. Some inheritances come with hidden costs. Sleep tight." I stared at the message, a cold knot forming in my stomach. There was no signature, but I didn't need one to know who it was from. Veronica Winters wasn't done with me yet. And something told me that this, the will reading, the funeral confrontation, even the possible break-in, was just the beginning. What I didn't know then was how right I was and how dangerous things were about to become. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight streaming through the curtains I'd forgotten to close. For a blissful moment, I didn't remember, not Edward's death, not Veronica, not the threatening text message that had kept me awake for hours. Then reality crashed back, and I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me once more. The smell of coffee drifted up from the kitchen. Michael was still here, keeping his protective vigil. I reached for my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Rebecca and a text message asking me to call her as soon as I woke up. Something was wrong. I could feel it. I dialed her number with trembling fingers. "Mom, thank God," she answered immediately. "Have you seen the newspaper?" "No, why?" "You need to turn on the news. Right now." I fumbled for the remote and switched on the television in my bedroom. The local morning news was just starting, and the headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen made my blood run cold. "Corporate espionage scandal rocks Harrington Construction." I sat frozen, staring at the television as the perky blonde anchor delivered the news that was about to destroy what remained of my life. Breaking this morning, Harrington Construction, one of the city's largest development firms, is at the center of what sources are calling a major corporate espionage scandal. According to an anonymous tip received by our station, confidential bid information for the multi-million-dollar Westlake development project was allegedly leaked to competitor Carlton Industries. The tip included internal emails and documents appearing to implicate the late Edward Harrington, who passed away last week after a battle with cancer. My phone rang again. It was Rebecca. "Mom, are you watching?" "Yes," I whispered, unable to tear my eyes from the screen where they were now showing a photograph of Edward shaking hands with the mayor at a charity event last year. "How is this possible?" "It gets worse," Rebecca said. "Keep watching." The anchor continued, her expression grave, but her eyes alight with the excitement of a juicy story. Adding to the scandal, sources claim that Mr. Harrington was involved in a romantic relationship with Veronica Winters, a marketing executive who recently left Carlton Industries to join Harrington Construction. Ms. Winters was spotted leaving Harrington's office late at night on multiple occasions in the weeks before his death. The screen switched to a grainy security camera image of Veronica and Edward entering his office building together. Her hand was on his arm, her face tilted up toward his with an intimate smile. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. I felt physically ill. Not only was Edward's affair now public knowledge, but he was being posthumously accused of betraying his own company. The company he had built from nothing over 4 decades. The company that bore our name. The district attorney's office has declined to comment on whether an official investigation is underway, the anchor continued. We reached out to Veronica Winters, who provided us with this exclusive statement. The screen cut to Veronica, looking appropriately somber in a conservative black dress, the sapphire pendant notably absent from her throat. "I am shocked and heartbroken by these allegations," she said, her eyes downcast. Edward Harrington was a man of integrity who loved his company and his employees. These accusations tarnish the legacy of a great man who can no longer defend himself. I can only assume they're coming from someone with a personal vendetta against either Edward or myself. Her eyes lifted then, looking directly into the camera with an expression of wounded innocence. Perhaps someone who discovered our relationship and is seeking revenge. I would ask that the media respect Edward's memory and his family's privacy during this difficult time. The implication was clear. She was suggesting I was behind the leak. That manipulative little. I began, but Rebecca cut me off. "Mom, there's more. They've been calling all morning trying to get a statement from you." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Michael's voice floated up from downstairs. "Mom, there are reporters outside." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. "Rebecca, I need to call you back." I dressed quickly in a simple navy dress, somber but dignified, and ran a brush through my hair. When I looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back at me. The woman reflected there looked 10 years older than she had a week ago, with new lines etched around her mouth and shadows beneath her eyes that makeup couldn't fully conceal. Downstairs, Michael was peering through the front curtains. "There's at least 3 news vans," he reported. "And a bunch of people with cameras. What do you want to do?" "Call Thomas Reed," I said decisively. "And your sister. I need them both here now. And David too, if he can get away from work." While Michael made the calls, I retreated to Edward's study and retrieved the flash drive with the Westlake files. If someone had leaked documents to the press, I needed to know exactly what they had. More importantly, I needed to know if the documents matched what I had found on Edward's computer last night. An hour later, Thomas arrived through the back door to avoid the media, looking haggard and unshaven. "Martha, I'm so sorry," he said as soon as we were alone in the study. "I had no idea this would go public so quickly." I stared at him. "You knew about this?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Not exactly. I told you I suspected Veronica was spying, but I had no proof. I've been quietly looking into it since Edward died. I didn't want to worry you until I had something concrete." "Well, someone found something concrete," I said sharply. "The question is who? And why take it to the media instead of the police?" Thomas's expression darkened. "That's what I've been asking myself all morning. This leak doesn't help Harrington Construction. It damages our reputation right before the Westlake bid deadline. The only ones who benefit are Carlton Industries." A horrible suspicion began forming in my mind. What if Veronica orchestrated this herself? What if this was her plan all along? Before Thomas could respond, Rebecca and David arrived together. Rebecca immediately took charge, her lawyer instincts kicking in. "We need to issue a statement," she said. "Something brief that acknowledges the situation without admitting any wrongdoing on Dad's part." "Why would we acknowledge it at all?" Michael demanded. "It's all lies. Because saying nothing makes it look like we have something to hide," Rebecca explained patiently. I handed Thomas the flash drive. "These are the Westlake files I found on Edward's computer last night. I need you to tell me if anything has been altered or if anything's missing." While Thomas examined the files on his laptop, Rebecca drafted a statement. David hovered anxiously, making coffee no one would drink. Michael continued to pace, occasionally checking the growing media presence outside. "Martha," Thomas said after nearly 30 minutes of tense silence, "these files have definitely been accessed recently. Some of the documents have been modified within the last week, after Edward died." "Modified how?" I asked. "The bid estimates." He turned the laptop so I could see the screen. "They've been inflated by nearly 20%. If we submitted this bid as is, we'd be laughably overpriced compared to our competitors." "Could Edward have made those changes?" David asked. Thomas shook his head. "Not unless he rose from the dead. The timestamp shows they were modified 3 days ago." "The day after the funeral," I murmured, "when Veronica knew she wouldn't be getting anything in the will." Rebecca looked up from her draft statement. "So you think she broke in, accessed Dad's computer, and deliberately sabotaged the bid files? And then leaked the whole thing to make it look like Dad was the one who betrayed the company," Michael added, his expression darkening with rage. "It's diabolical," David whispered. "I thought about the text message I'd received last night. Some inheritances come with hidden costs. This was what she'd meant. She couldn't take my money, so she would take my husband's reputation instead." "We need to go to the police," Rebecca said. "Now." "With this evidence." Thomas hesitated. "It's circumstantial at best. The files were on Edward's computer, which you had access to, Martha. They could argue you made the changes yourself." "Why would I sabotage my own company?" I demanded. "Grief makes people do strange things," Thomas said gently. "At least, that's what her lawyers will argue." Before I could respond, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Harrington?" A woman's crisp, professional voice. "This is Detective Lisa Chun with the Commercial Crimes Division. We'd like to speak with you as soon as possible regarding the allegations against your late husband's company." I closed my eyes. "Of course, Detective. I'm available whenever you need. We'll be at your residence in 20 minutes. After I hung up, I relayed the conversation to the others. "I'm calling our lawyer," Rebecca said immediately, reaching for her phone. "No," I said firmly. "I have nothing to hide. I'll speak to them without counsel." "Mom, that's not wise," Rebecca protested. "I'm not going to act like I have something to hide," I insisted. "That's exactly what Veronica wants." The detectives, Lisa Chun and her partner, a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, were professional and direct. They managed to slip past the media circus outside with minimal fuss and settled in my living room with notepads at the ready. "Mrs. Harrington, we understand this is a difficult time for you," Detective Chun began. "But we need to ask you some questions about your late husband's business practices." I nodded, sitting straight-backed on the edge of the sofa. My children flanked me protectively while Thomas stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. "When did you first become aware that your husband might be involved in sharing proprietary information with Carlton Industries?" Detective Rodriguez asked bluntly. "I wasn't aware of it because it didn't happen," I replied. "My husband would never betray his own company." The detectives exchanged glances. "Mrs. Harrington, we have emails from your husband's account to Veronica Winters discussing the Westlake project in detail." Ms. Winters then forwarded those emails to an account at Carlton Industries. "That's impossible," Thomas interjected. "Edward would never." Detective Chun held up a hand. "Mr. Reed, please. We'd like to hear from Mrs. Harrington." I took a deep breath. "My husband was having an affair," with Veronica Winters. I only discovered this at his funeral when she confronted me. But Edward would never deliberately undermine his own company, no matter what his personal failings might have been. Are you aware that the Westlake bid files on your husband's computer were modified 3 days ago? Detective Rodriguez asked. I met his gaze steadily. Yes, I discovered that this morning. Since my husband died over a week ago, obviously, he wasn't the one who made those changes. Who else had access to his computer?
Ida.
It's in his study, but I didn't modify any files. Can you account for your whereabouts 3 days ago, between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m.? Detective Chin asked, her pen poised over her notepad. I blinked in surprise. I was here, asleep. My son Michael stayed over that night because I was upset after the will reading. Michael nodded. I can confirm that. I was in the guest room down the hall from my mother's bedroom. Detective Rodriguez made a note. And the night before last? We have evidence that someone accessed these files again at approximately 11:30 p.m. I froze. That was when I'd heard the noise in the house. I was here in the study, using Edward's computer to look at family photos. I lied smoothly. I couldn't sleep. The detectives continued their questioning for nearly an hour, circling back to the same points repeatedly, looking for inconsistencies in my story. I maintained my composure, answering truthfully about everything except my discovery of the flash drive and my suspicions about Veronica. Finally, Detective Chin closed her notebook. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Harrington. We may need to speak with you again as our investigation continues. Of course, I said, rising to show them out. I want to get to the bottom of this as much as you do. At the door, Detective Chin paused. One more thing, Mrs. Harrington. Were you aware that your husband changed his will just 3 weeks before his death? My heart skipped a beat. Yes, my lawyer informed me that he added a specific exclusion clause for Ms. Winters. And did you know that he consulted with a divorce attorney the same week? The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet.
No, y whispered.
I wasn't aware of that. Detective Chin nodded, her expression unreadable. Thank you again for your time. After they left, I sank back onto the sofa, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Mom? David's concerned face swam before my eyes. Are you okay? He was going to divorce me, I said hollowly. He really was planning to leave. Rebecca sat beside me, taking my hand. We don't know that for sure. Consulting an attorney doesn't mean he'd made a final decision. But it supports Veronica's story, I said. It makes it more believable that Edward might have been sharing information with her. Thomas cleared his throat. There's something else you should know, Martha. The board is meeting this afternoon to discuss the scandal. As majority shareholder, you should be there. I looked up at him, suddenly suspicious. Why wasn't I informed of this meeting before now? Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. Some board members questioned whether it was appropriate for you to attend, given the circumstances. Given that my husband is being accused of corporate espionage, you mean? I said coldly. Or is it that they think I might be involved too? There are concerns, Thomas admitted. The timing of everything. Edward's death, the will reading, the leak to the press, it raises questions. I stood up, anger burning away my shock and grief. Well, they'll have their answers this afternoon, because I will be at that meeting. And I expect you to back me up, Thomas. After 30 years as Edward's partner, I think you owe him that much. The board meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. at the Harrington Construction headquarters downtown. I asked Rebecca to come with me as both moral support and legal counsel. Michael and David reluctantly agreed to stay behind to deal with the continuing media presence at the house. As our car approached the sleek glass and steel building that bore my family name, I saw a familiar figure on the sidewalk outside, Veronica Winters, surrounded by reporters, microphones thrust in her face. She was crying delicately, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. What is she doing here? Rebecca growled. Putting on a show, I replied grimly. We used the executive entrance at the back of the building to avoid the media. In the elevator up to the top floor boardroom, I checked my reflection in the mirrored wall and straightened my spine. I wouldn't let them see my pain or my fear. The boardroom fell silent as Rebecca and I entered. 8 pairs of eyes turned to assess me, men in expensive suits who had dined in my home, who had sent me Christmas cards, who had attended my children's weddings. Now they looked at me with suspicion and something worse. Pity. Thomas stood at the head of the table. Martha, Rebecca, thank you for joining us. Please have a seat. I took the chair at the opposite end of the table, Edward's chair. A small act of defiance that didn't go unnoticed by the board members. Gentlemen, I said calmly, I understand you have concerns about the current situation. I'm here to address them directly. Harrison Wells, the oldest board member and Edward's golf partner for 20 years, cleared his throat. Martha, this is obviously a difficult time for you. Perhaps it would be best if you took a leave of absence while we sort through this mess. A leave of absence from what, exactly? I asked. I'm not an employee, Harrison. I'm the majority shareholder. Yes, well, about that, said Jeffrey Palmer, a man I never particularly liked. There is a provision in the company bylaws that allows for temporary suspension of voting rights if a shareholder is under investigation for actions detrimental to the company. Rebecca leaned forward. My mother is not under investigation. She's been questioned as a witness, nothing more. The distinction may be academic at this point, Palmer replied smoothly. The damage to our reputation is already done. We've had 3 clients call this morning to express concerns about the Westlake bid. Which brings us to the immediate problem, Thomas interjected. The bid is due in 5 days. We need to decide whether to proceed or withdraw. Withdraw? I echoed incredulously. And hand the project to Carlton on a silver platter? That's exactly what they want. Martha, Thomas said gently, the bid documents have been compromised. Even if we recreate them from scratch, there's a cloud hanging over us now. The selection committee will have seen the news. I looked around the table, reading the expressions of each board member. Some wouldn't meet my eye. Others looked at me with barely concealed hostility. Only Thomas's gaze held any warmth, and even his was tinged with resignation. They had already decided. Before I even walked into the room, they had decided to give up. My husband, I said slowly, deliberately, built this company from nothing. When you, Harrison, were still selling insurance door to door, Edward was pouring foundations with his own hands. When you, Jeffrey, were still in college, Edward was taking out a second mortgage on our home to make payroll during the recession. I stood up, placing both hands on the table and leaning forward. Edward Harrington would never, ever give up on this company. And neither will I. Mrs. Harrington, Palmer began condescendingly. I'm not finished, I snapped. You're all so quick to believe the worst about a man who can't defend himself. A man who employed you, mentored you, invited you into his home. Have any of you even questioned where these allegations came from? Have you considered who benefits from them? A younger board member, Eric Daniels, spoke up. Are you suggesting this is some kind of setup? I'm stating it plainly, I replied. Veronica Winters targeted my husband. She seduced him, gained access to confidential information, and when she discovered she wouldn't inherit his money, she orchestrated this scandal to destroy his reputation and cripple his company. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Harrison Wells sighed heavily. Martha, grief can make us look for someone to blame. Oh, spare me your patronizing psychoanalysis. I cut in. I'm not some hysterical widow inventing conspiracy theories. I have evidence. That got their attention. Rebecca slid a folder across the table, copies of the documents we'd found, with the timestamps of the modifications highlighted. These files were altered after Edward's death, I explained as they passed the papers around. The bid numbers were inflated to ensure we'd lose the contract. And conveniently, this anonymous leak happens just days before the deadline, when we have minimal time to recover. Eric Daniels studied the documents with a frown. This is concerning, but it doesn't prove Ms. Winters was involved. No, I conceded, but I think we can prove it if we work together. I outlined a plan, risky, potentially disastrous, but with a chance of exposing Veronica and salvaging both the Westlake bid and Edward's reputation. As I spoke, I watched their expressions shift from skepticism to grudging interest. When I finished, Thomas was the first to respond. It could work, but the timing would have to be perfect. And if it fails?
Palmer asked.
Then we're no worse off than we are now, I replied. But at least we'll have fought back instead of surrendering. The board voted 6-2 in favor of my plan. As we adjourned, Thomas pulled me aside. Martha, there's something else you should know, he said quietly. Something I didn't want to mention in front of the others. I braced myself. What is it? Edward came to me about a month before his diagnosis. He was concerned about some financial irregularities he'd discovered. Money moving between accounts that couldn't be explained by normal operations. My blood ran cold. Embezzlement. Thomas nodded grimly. He asked me to keep it quiet while he investigated. Then he got sick, and it was never resolved. You think Veronica was stealing as well as spying? I don't know, but given everything else, it seems possible. I thought about the detective's question earlier, about Edward consulting a divorce attorney. What if it wasn't because he planned to leave me for Veronica? What if he had discovered her betrayal and was trying to protect himself and the company? We need to find out for sure, I said. Can you get me access to the financial records without anyone knowing? Thomas hesitated. It would be better if it came from you, as majority shareholder. Less suspicious. I nodded. I'll have Rebecca draw up the paperwork. In the meantime, we proceed with the plan as agreed. As Rebecca and I left the building, I noticed Veronica was gone from the front entrance, but the media remained. One reporter spotted me and shouted my name, triggering a rush in our direction. Mrs. Harrington, what's your response to the allegations against your late husband? Do you believe Edward Harrington was selling company secrets? How long have you known about your husband's affair with Veronica Winters? Rebecca tried to hurry me toward our waiting car, but I stopped, turning to face the cameras. This was part of the plan too, though not the part I'd shared with the board. My husband was a man of integrity who built a company that has shaped this city's skyline for 4 decades, I said clearly, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. These allegations are not only false but malicious, designed to damage Harrington Construction at a critical moment. I intend to find out who is behind them and why. A young female reporter pushed forward. Ms. Winters claims you're making these accusations out of jealousy and revenge. How do you respond? I smiled thinly. I would say that Ms. Winters should be very careful about what she accuses others of. People who live in glass houses and all that. Are you threatening Ms. Winters? Another reporter called out. Not at all, I replied calmly. I'm simply suggesting that the truth has a way of coming to light. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run. As we drove away, Rebecca turned to me with wide eyes. Mom, that was intense. Do you think it was wise to challenge her so publicly? It wasn't wise, I admitted. It was necessary. We need her angry, reactive. People make mistakes when they're emotional, remember? Back at home, we found Michael and David huddled with Thomas, who had somehow beaten us there despite leaving after we did. They were gathered around Edward's laptop, expressions grave. What's happened? I asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. Michael looked up, his face pale. We've been going through Dad's emails more thoroughly. There's something you need to see. He turned the screen toward me. It was an email from Veronica to Edward, dated just 2 days before his final hospitalization. Edward, I know you're having doubts. I know Thomas has poisoned your mind against me. But remember what we discovered together. Remember who is the most to lose if the truth comes out. I've kept my end of our bargain. I've protected you, but my patience is running out. Either you follow through on your promises, or I'll have no choice but to take matters into my own hands. The documents I showed you were just the beginning. There's more, much more. And it all leads back to the same person. You know what needs to be done. For us. For the future we planned. All my love, V. I read the email twice, trying to make sense of it. What documents? What bargain? Who is she talking about? Thomas shook his head. I don't know. Edward never mentioned any of this to me. He said he was concerned about financial irregularities, but nothing about documents or bargains. Could she have been blackmailing him? David suggested quietly. The thought had crossed my mind as well. But blackmailing him with what? What could Edward have done that was so terrible he would betray his company to keep it secret? There's more, Michael said. We found a hidden folder on his hard drive. It's encrypted, but the file name is Insurance VW. VW, I murmured. Veronica Winters. Rebecca frowned. Insurance against what? I don't know, I admitted. But I think we need to find out before we proceed with our plan to expose her. If she has something on Edward, something damaging, she might use it when we corner her. Can we crack the encryption? Thomas asked. I have a friend who specializes in data recovery, David offered. He's discreet. I could ask him to take a look. I nodded. Do it. But be careful. We don't know who we can trust right now. As evening fell, my children reluctantly agreed to go home and get some rest. Thomas stayed behind, claiming he wanted to review some documents, but I suspected he was reluctant to leave me alone after everything that had happened. We sat in Edward's study, the room that had once been the heart of our home. How many evenings had I brought Edward coffee here while he worked late? How many times had I kissed the top of his head as he pored over blueprints and contracts? Had it all been a lie? Had I ever really known him at all? What are you thinking? Thomas asked softly, breaking the silence. I'm wondering if I spent 37 years married to a stranger, I confessed. If the man I grieved for even existed. Thomas reached across the desk and took my hand. Edward was complicated. We all are. But the man I knew for 30 years was decent at his core. Whatever happened with Veronica, whatever mistakes he made, that doesn't erase a lifetime of good. His words echoed my own eulogy, and I felt tears threatening. Then why didn't he trust me? Why didn't he tell me what was happening? Maybe he was trying to protect you, Thomas suggested. Or maybe he was ashamed. I pulled my hand away gently. I don't need protection, Thomas. I never have. What I need is the truth. He nodded, a strange expression crossing his face. The truth, he repeated quietly. It can be a dangerous thing, Martha. Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. What aren't you telling me, Thomas? He seemed to age before my eyes, his shoulders slumping. There's something I've been keeping from you. Something Edward made me promise never to tell you. My heart began to race. Tell me. Now. Thomas took a deep breath. 20 years ago, when the company was struggling after the market crash, Edward made a deal. With Richard Carlton. Carlton. I echoed in disbelief. Our biggest competitor? They weren't competitors then, Thomas explained. Carlton was just starting out, flush with family money, but no experience. Edward had the experience but was cash poor. They formed a silent partnership. I struggled to process this. Edward never mentioned any partnership with Carlton. Because it wasn't entirely above board, Thomas said carefully. Some of the arrangements they made skirted regulatory requirements. Nothing illegal, exactly, but not something you'd want scrutinized too closely. And this relates to Veronica how? Thomas ran a hand through his hair. I'm not sure, but Richard Carlton died last year. His son, Marcus, took over the company. He's ruthless, ambitious, and has a personal vendetta against Edward. Why? Because when Carlton Industries went public 5 years ago, Edward sold his silent shares for a substantial profit. Marcus felt Edward had taken advantage of his father's declining health to force the sale. My mind was racing. So, you think Marcus Carlton might be behind this? That he hired Veronica to spy on Edward? It's possible, Thomas conceded. But that doesn't explain Edward's relationship with her, or what she might have been blackmailing him with. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Unknown number again. I answered cautiously. Martha Harrington? A man's voice. Unfamiliar. Yes. My name is Marcus Carlton. I think it's time you and I had a conversation. My eyes locked with Thomas's as a chill ran down my spine. Mr. Carlton. What an unexpected surprise. I imagine it is, he replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. I'm sure Thomas Reed has been filling your head with all sorts of stories about me. I looked at Thomas, who was watching me intently. Actually, we were just discussing you. How convenient. Then you won't be surprised when I tell you that I know exactly what your husband was hiding. And I know what Veronica Winters has been doing. Is that so? I kept my voice neutral, though my hand was shaking. Indeed. I also know that you've been quite busy today, meeting with the board, making statements to the press, planning your counterattack. I froze. How could he know about the board meeting already? What do you want, Mr. Carlton? A meeting. Just you and me. No lawyers, no partners, no children hovering protectively. There's something you need to see. Why would I agree to that? His laugh was cold. Because, Mrs. Harrington, contrary to what you may believe, I'm not your enemy. Veronica Winters is not working for me. And your husband wasn't selling company secrets. He was trying to stop someone who was. I glanced at Thomas, whose expression had grown increasingly alarmed. And I should believe you why? Because I can prove it. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., the Carlton Building penthouse office. Come alone. And if I refuse? Then by this time tomorrow, your husband's reputation won't be the only one in ruins.
He paused.
Oh, and Martha? Don't discuss this with Thomas Reed. He's not the loyal friend you think he is. The line went dead. I set down the phone slowly, my mind reeling. What did he want? Thomas asked, his voice tight. I hesitated, Carlton's warning echoing in my ears. Don't discuss this with Thomas Reed. Why would he say that? What did he know? He wants to meet, I said carefully. Tomorrow morning. You're not going, Thomas said immediately. It's too dangerous. He's trying to manipulate you. And yet he seemed to know a lot about what's been happening today, I replied. Things he shouldn't know unless he has an inside source. Thomas's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just processing. A heavy silence fell between us. Finally, Thomas stood. It's been a long day. You should get some rest. We can talk more in the morning. I nodded, suddenly desperate to be alone with my thoughts. Thank you for everything today, Thomas. I don't know what I would have done without you. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's what friends are for. After he left, I sat in Edward's chair for a long time, turning over everything I'd learned. Edward's secret partnership with Richard Carlton, the encrypted folder labeled Insurance VW, Marcus Carlton's cryptic phone call, and his warning about Thomas. What was the truth? Who could I trust? I opened Edward's laptop again and stared at the locked folder. What secrets was my husband keeping? And how far would people go to protect them or expose them? My phone buzzed with a text message. I expected another threat from Veronica, but instead, it was from an unknown number. Check the safe behind Edward's Wyeth painting. The combination is your anniversary date. Come alone tomorrow. Trust no one.
MC.
Marcus Carlton again. How did he know about Edward's safe? And more importantly, how did he know the combination? I moved to the large landscape painting that dominated one wall of the study, an original Andrew Wyeth that Edward had purchased at auction for our 30th anniversary. Behind it, as Carlton had said, was a wall safe I'd never known existed. With trembling fingers, I entered our anniversary date, June 17th, 79. The safe clicked open, revealing a single manila envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in Edward's familiar scrawl. Martha, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. I hope I had the chance to explain everything to you myself, but if not, this drive contains all the evidence. I'm sorry for the secrets, for the lies. Most of all, I'm sorry for Veronica. It wasn't what you think. Nothing in my life was as important as you and our family. Remember that, whatever happens next. All my love, always, Edward. Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the note to my chest. Even now, even after everything, his words could still break my heart. I inserted the USB drive into the laptop. It contained a single folder labeled Truth. Inside were dozens of documents, emails, and photographs. I opened the first file, a letter from Edward to Marcus Carlton dated 6 months ago. Marcus, I've discovered something disturbing about your company's financial operations. The attached documents show a pattern of money laundering through your international contracts that has been ongoing for at least 3 years. I don't believe you're personally involved. The trail leads to your CFO, Howard Jenkins, and possibly others in your executive team. I'm bringing this to you directly out of respect for your father. Richard would be devastated to see his company used this way. We had our differences, but he was always an honest businessman. Let's meet discreetly to discuss how to address this without damaging Carlton Industries' reputation unnecessarily. Edward Harrington. I stared at the screen in shock. Money laundering? Carlton Industries? This was far bigger than corporate espionage or a personal vendetta. I opened file after file, piecing together a story that made my blood run cold. Edward had discovered criminal activity at Carlton Industries while conducting due diligence for a potential joint venture. Instead of going to the authorities immediately, he had approached Marcus Carlton directly, believing him to be unaware of what was happening in his own company. But Marcus hadn't responded as Edward expected. Instead of gratitude, he'd reacted with hostility and threats. That's when Edward had hired Veronica Winters, not as a marketing executive, but as a private investigator. Her previous job at Carlton Industries made her the perfect person to gather evidence without raising suspicions. The affair had been a cover story, a way to explain their frequent meetings and communications. The intimate photos the press had received showed carefully staged encounters designed to look incriminating while revealing nothing of substance. I found an email from Veronica to Edward dated 3 months ago. The CFO is definitely involved, but he's not the mastermind. I've traced the offshore accounts back to a shell company owned by Thomas Reed. He's been working with Carlton's people for years. Your partner is betraying you, Edward.
I'm sorry.
Thomas. My hand flew to my mouth. Thomas Reed, Edward's partner and friend for 30 years, the man who had been by my side since the funeral, guiding me, advising me, manipulating me. Everything suddenly clicked into place. Thomas's insistence that we not go to the police. His convenient appearance at my house the day after the funeral with warnings about Veronica. His careful steering of the board meeting today. He had been controlling the narrative from the beginning, positioning himself as my protector while systematically isolating me from anyone who might tell me the truth. And now I was alone in my house with evidence that could send him to prison for decades. As if summoned by my thoughts, I heard a noise from downstairs, the soft click of the back door closing. The same sound I'd heard the night before. Someone was in my house. And this time, I was certain it wasn't my imagination. I quickly ejected the USB drive and slipped it into my pocket along with Edward's note. Then I silently closed the laptop and moved toward the study door, turning off the desk lamp as I went. The house plunged into darkness. From the hallway, I could hear footsteps moving stealthily up the stairs. Heavy footsteps. A man's. I glanced around desperately for a weapon, something to defend myself with. The crystal paperweight on Edward's desk caught my eye. I grabbed it and flattened myself against the wall beside the door, heart pounding so loudly I was sure the intruder would hear it. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, paused, then continued down the hallway toward the study. The door was already partially open. I watched in terrified fascination as a shadow darkened the doorway. A figure stepped into the room. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, I could make out a familiar silhouette, Thomas Reed. He moved directly to the Wyeth painting and swung it aside, revealing the safe. When he saw it was already open and empty, he swore under his breath. "Looking for something?" I asked, flipping on the desk lamp. Thomas spun around, his face a mask of shock that quickly transformed into a calculated calm.
"Martha, you startled me."
"Evidently," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Most people knock before entering someone's home at night." "I was worried about you," he said smoothly. "After everything that happened today, I wanted to check that you were all right." I knocked, but there was no answer. "So you used your key?" I raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware you had one." Thomas's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Edward gave me one years ago. For emergencies." "And what's the emergency tonight, Thomas? What was so urgent that you needed to check Edward's safe?" His eyes darted to my hand clutching the paperweight, then back to my face. I don't know what you're implying, Martha, but I don't appreciate it. I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm asking directly. Why are you breaking into my house in the middle of the night to access a safe I didn't even know existed until an hour ago? Thomas sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I'd seen him make countless times before. How had I never noticed how calculated it was? How practiced? You've been talking to Marcus Carlton, he said flatly. Yes. And he's filled your head with lies about me. He directed me to evidence Edward left behind. I corrected. Evidence about money laundering through Carlton Industries. Evidence that implicates you. Thomas's face darkened. Edward was mistaken. He misunderstood what he found. Did he? I took a step back, keeping the desk between us. So you're not denying your involvement, just claiming Edward misinterpreted it? It's complicated, Martha. Business dealings at this level always are. There are gray areas, regulatory loopholes. Save it. I cut him off. I've seen the documents. The offshore accounts. The shell companies. This isn't a gray area, Thomas. It's criminal. His expression changed then, the mask of friendship falling away completely. What exactly do you think you're going to do with this information, Martha? Go to the police? The FBI? You have no idea what you're dealing with or who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, I replied, a strange calm settling over me. A man who betrayed his business partner of 30 years. A man who's been using me since Edward died to find out what I know and what evidence might exist against him. Thomas laughed, a cold sound I'd never heard from him before. You always were smarter than Edward gave you credit for. The casual cruelty of the remark stung, but I didn't let it show. And you were never as smart as you thought you were. Edward figured you out months ago. That's why he hired Veronica. Ah yes, the lovely Miss Winters. Thomas moved toward the window, putting more distance between us. Edward's greatest mistake. He actually believed she was working for him when all along, my blood ran cold. She was working for you. He smiled thinly. Not exactly. Veronica Winters works exclusively for Veronica Winters. She's a mercenary in the truest sense, loyal to whoever pays her the most. Edward hired her to spy on Carlton Industries. I simply made her a better offer to spy on Edward instead. And the affair? Was that your idea too? No, that was all Edward, I'm afraid. Middle-aged men are so predictable when a beautiful young woman shows interest. It made my job easier, though. The more time they spent together, the more opportunities she had to access his files. I thought about the sapphire pendant, the diamond bracelet, the engagement ring hidden in Edward's closet. Had it all been manipulation? Had Edward really been that blind? What about the leak to the press? I asked. The corporate espionage allegations? Was that Veronica's idea or yours? Thomas shrugged. A necessary distraction. We needed everyone looking the wrong way while we tied up loose ends. Loose ends, I repeated. Like me. His expression softened into something almost like regret. It didn't have to be this way, Martha. If you just accepted the story, grieved your husband, and let the company handle its own problems. You mean if I'd been the docile, clueless widow you expected me to be? Something like that. He glanced at his watch. But now we have a problem. You know too much, and I can't have you meeting with Marcus Carlton tomorrow. My grip tightened on the paperweight. Are you threatening me, Thomas? I'm stating a fact. Marcus is desperate. His company is on the verge of collapse, and he needs a scapegoat. He's using you to get to me, to shift blame for his own failings. I've seen the evidence, I said. It's your name on those offshore accounts, not his. Thomas's smile was chilling. Evidence can be fabricated, Martha, especially by a man with Marcus Carlton's resources. He took a step toward me. I raised the paperweight. Stay back. Don't be dramatic, he sighed. I'm not going to hurt you. I just need the USB drive Edward left you. So, you can destroy the evidence? So, I can show you what's really on it, he countered. Edward was many things, but he wasn't a saint. There are documents on that drive that would devastate you and your children if they became public. I thought about Edward's note. It wasn't what you think. Nothing in my life was as important as you and our family. Was Thomas bluffing, or was there something on the drive I hadn't found yet? I don't believe you, I said finally. That's your prerogative. Thomas moved with unexpected speed, circling the desk before I could react. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing until the paperweight fell from my grasp. But I'm taking that drive one way or another. Fear surged through me, but beneath it was a deeper emotion, rage. Rage at this man who had betrayed my husband, who had manipulated me in my grief, who now stood in my home threatening me. You won't get away with this, I hissed. My children know I was meeting Carlton tomorrow. If anything happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. Thomas interrupted, his grip on my wrist tightening painfully. You're going to have a stress-induced breakdown. Understandable, given recent events. Your doctor will prescribe something to help you rest. By the time you're thinking clearly again, this will all be over. A chill ran down my spine as his plan became clear. He was going to drug me, make it look like I'd suffered a collapse under the strain of Edward's death and the subsequent scandal. You won't. I began, but he cut me off. Enough talking. The drive, Martha.
Now.
As he reached for my pocket with his free hand, a voice spoke from the doorway, a voice I knew as well as my own. Get your hands off my mother. Michael stood in the study entrance, his face a mask of cold fury, a baseball bat gripped in his hands. Behind him, Rebecca and David flanked the doorway like avenging angels. Thomas froze, then slowly released my wrist. Michael, this isn't what it looks like.
Really?
Rebecca stepped forward, her phone held up. Because it looks exactly like what Marcus Carlton warned us about when he called an hour ago. Thomas's face drained of color. Carlton called you? Right after he spoke to Mom, David confirmed. He suggested we might want to check on her. Said you might have plans that didn't align with her best interests. And we've been recording your entire conversation, Rebecca added, holding up her phone. Every word, Thomas. Every confession. Thomas lunged toward Rebecca, but Michael was faster. The bat connected with Thomas's shoulder, sending him stumbling backward with a cry of pain. David, call 911, Michael ordered, keeping the bat raised. Tell them we have an intruder who assaulted Mom. As David made the call, I sank into Edward's chair, suddenly exhausted. Rebecca rushed to my side. Mom, are you okay? Did he hurt you? I shook my head, watching as Michael forced Thomas to sit in a chair across the room, the bat still raised menacingly. I'm fine, I said, just processing. Thomas glared at me from across the room. This isn't over, Martha. You have no idea what you're getting into. I met his gaze steadily.
No, Thomas.
It is over. For you, at least. As we waited for the police to arrive, I felt a strange sense of clarity washing over me. Edward hadn't betrayed me after all, at least, not in the way I'd feared. The affair with Veronica had been a ruse, a cover for his investigation. The consulting with a divorce attorney, perhaps a precaution to protect me if things went wrong? But there were still unanswered questions. Why hadn't Edward trusted me with the truth? What was on the rest of the USB drive? And most importantly, what would I find when I met with Marcus Carlton tomorrow? One thing was certain. Thomas Reed had underestimated me. So had Veronica Winters. They had expected a grieving widow, too paralyzed by loss and betrayal to fight back. They didn't know who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. As the police led Thomas away in handcuffs, I stood on my front porch watching the flashing lights illuminate the night. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new revelations. But for now, I had won this round. And Edward, wherever he was, would be proud. Later that night, as my children slept in their old bedrooms, none of them willing to leave me alone after what had happened, I sat in Edward's study examining the rest of the files on the USB drive. What I found both shocked me and broke my heart all over again. Thomas hadn't been bluffing about one thing. There were documents that could devastate our family if made public. But they weren't about Edward. They were about Thomas himself, and the extent of his crimes went far beyond money laundering. I found evidence linking Thomas to bribery of government officials, fraudulent contracts, and even blackmail of business competitors. Edward had been gathering evidence for months, building a case not just against Thomas, but against a network of corruption that spread through the highest levels of the city's business community. And at the center of it all was a name I recognized immediately: Judge William Hargrove, the man who had presided over some of the city's most controversial development deals for the past decade. The man who was scheduled to oversee the final approval of the Westlake development project. The man who is also my brother-in-law, married to Edward's sister, Helen. I closed the laptop, my mind reeling. Tomorrow's meeting with Marcus Carlton suddenly took on new significance. How much did he know? And more importantly, what did he want from me? As dawn broke on what promised to be the most important day of my life, I made a decision. I would meet with Carlton as planned. I would hear what he had to say. But I wouldn't go alone, and I wouldn't go unprepared. Veronica Winters might have taken my husband's affection and tried to steal his legacy. Thomas Reed might have betrayed decades of friendship for greed. But I was Martha Harrington, and I wouldn't rest until justice was served, not just for Edward, but for myself as well. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Morning arrived with the cold clarity of purpose. I dressed with deliberate care, a sleek charcoal suit that projected confidence and authority, diamond studs in my ears that had been Edward's first gift to me when the company began turning a profit. My armor for the battle ahead. My children were already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, huddled around the coffee maker like sentinels. "You don't have to do this," Michael said immediately, seeing my attire. "We can call Carlton, reschedule until we know more." "No," I replied, accepting the cup Rebecca handed me. "We play this on my terms now, not his. And certainly not Thomas's." "At least let one of us come with you," David pleaded. "After what happened last night." Carlton was clear. I come alone or not at all. I took a sip of coffee, grimacing at its strength. "Besides, I need the three of you working on different angles. Michael, I want you at Harrington headquarters. The board needs to know about Thomas's arrest, but control the narrative. No details about the money laundering or corruption allegations yet." Michael nodded reluctantly. "Rebecca, I need you to meet with Edward's lawyer, James Benson. Show him what we found and get his legal perspective on how we proceed. He's been our family attorney for decades. If we can't trust him, we can't trust anyone." "And me?" David asked. "You have the most important job," I said, meeting his gaze. "I need you to find Veronica Winters." He blinked in surprise. "Find her? Why?" "Because she's the wild card in all of this. She worked for Edward, then for Thomas, possibly for Carlton too. She knows things we need to know." "What if she refuses to talk to me?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was the sapphire pendant I'd seen around Veronica's neck at the funeral. "Where did you get that?" Rebecca gasped. "Edward's closet. It was in the duffel bag with the engagement ring." I handed the box to David. "Tell her I'm willing to make a deal. Information for immunity." "Mom," Michael said slowly, "you don't have the authority to offer immunity for criminal charges." "She doesn't know that," I replied with a thin smile. "And technically, I'm not offering legal immunity, just my personal agreement not to pursue civil charges against her for her affair with Edward. The emotional distress, public humiliation, all of it. Veronica strikes me as someone who's very concerned with her public image and future prospects. The threat of a messy, public lawsuit might be enough to get her talking." My children stared at me with a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like admiration. "When did you get so strategic?" David asked. I thought about the decades I'd spent watching Edward build his business, navigate crises, outmaneuver competitors. I might have been in the background, but I'd been paying attention. "I've always been strategic," I said simply. "I just never needed to show it before." At 7:45 a.m., I stood in the gleaming lobby of the Carlton Building, a modernist glass tower that rivaled Harrington Construction's headquarters in both height and prestige. The security guard checked my ID, made a phone call, and then directed me to a private elevator at the back of the lobby. "Penthouse level, Mrs. Harrington." Mr. Carlton is expecting you. The elevator rose smoothly, floor numbers ticking upward with quiet dings. I used the time to center myself, to prepare for whatever Marcus Carlton might throw at me. I had the USB drive in my purse, along with a small digital recorder Rebecca had insisted I carry. "Record everything," she'd said. "We're not taking any more chances." The elevator doors opened directly into a vast office, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The view was spectacular. You could see the river winding through downtown, the park where I'd pushed my children on swings decades ago, and in the distance, the distinctive silhouette of the Harrington Tower, Edward's crowning achievement. Marcus Carlton stood at the windows, his back to me. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with the trim physique of a man who had time for regular workouts. When he turned, I was struck by how much he resembled his father. The same piercing blue eyes, the same strong jawline. But where Richard Carlton had carried himself with old-world dignity, his son had a predatory intensity that put me immediately on edge. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming, especially after the excitement of last night." I shook his hand briefly. "You seem well-informed about my personal affairs, Mr. Carlton. Please call me Marcus." He gestured to a seating area by the windows. "And yes, I make it my business to stay informed. Thomas Reed's arrest for breaking and entering was on the police scanner last night. Not much detail provided publicly, but I have my sources." I sat in one of the sleek leather chairs, placing my purse beside me. "Your sources seem quite thorough, including whoever told you about Edward's safe and its contents." Marcus smiled enigmatically as he took the seat across from me. "Edward himself told me about the safe. About 6 months ago, when he first came to me with his suspicions about Thomas." "So you knew," I said flatly. "You knew what Thomas was doing, using your company for money laundering." "Not initially," Marcus replied, his expression darkening. "My father was traditional in his business approach. When he fell ill, he kept me away from certain aspects of the company's operations. By the time I took full control after his death, the damage was done." "And yet you didn't go to the authorities when Edward brought you evidence." Marcus leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Mrs. Harrington, Martha, you need to understand the complexity of the situation. The money laundering operation Thomas established didn't just implicate him or my CFO. It reached into city government, the judicial system, even law enforcement." "Judge Hargrove," I said. His eyebrows rose slightly. "You've been doing your homework." "Yes, your brother-in-law is involved, along with at least 2 city council members and the deputy commissioner of the building department. So instead of going to the FBI, you and Edward decided to what? Handle it yourselves?" Edward wanted to gather enough evidence to ensure everyone involved would be prosecuted. He was particularly concerned about protecting your family, given Hargrove's connection. I thought about Helen, Edward's sister, who had always been fragile. A public scandal involving her husband would destroy her. "That's why he hired Veronica," I said, pieces continuing to fall into place. "As a private investigator." Marcus nodded. "She came highly recommended. Former FBI with specialized training in financial crimes. Her previous position at Carlton Industries gave her the perfect cover to access records without raising suspicions." "And the affair?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That was unexpected. Edward insisted it was part of their cover story, but it became real. I finished for him." "I believe so, yes. At least on his part." Marcus paused. "Veronica Winters is very good at her job, Martha. Part of that job is getting close to her targets." The implication sent a fresh wave of pain through me. Had Edward's feelings for Veronica been genuine, even if the initial arrangement wasn't? Had he fallen for his own cover story? "Why are you telling me all this now?" I asked, pushing aside the personal hurt to focus on the bigger picture. "Why not come to me immediately after Edward died?" "Because I wasn't sure who I could trust," Marcus admitted. "Thomas Reed has been manipulating events since Edward's diagnosis. The anonymous tip to the media about corporate espionage, that was Thomas trying to control the narrative, to position himself as the victim before anyone could accuse him. And Veronica? Where does she stand in all this? Marcus's expression hardened. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? She was working for Edward, gathering evidence against Thomas and the others. But after Edward died, she switched sides, I guessed. Or she's playing her own angle, Marcus corrected. She disappeared 3 days ago, cleaned out her apartment, closed her bank accounts. The last person she was seen with was Howard Jenkins, my former CFO, who is also now missing. A chill ran down my spine. You think they're running? I think they're tying up loose ends before they run. Marcus met my gaze directly. And you, Martha, are a very significant loose end. The threat assessment wasn't lost on me. Is that why you asked me here? To warn me. Partly, he acknowledged, but also because we need each other. You have what Edward found. He nodded toward my purse where the USB drive rested, and I have resources you'll need to protect yourself and your family while we bring this whole operation down. We? I echoed skeptically. Mr. Carlton, 12 hours ago, I believed you were behind a plot to destroy my husband's company. Why would I trust you now? Marcus smiled thinly. Because unlike Thomas Reed or Veronica Winters, I have nothing to gain by deceiving you. This scandal has already damaged Carlton Industries. The only way to salvage both our companies' reputations is to expose the real criminals and make it clear that neither Edward nor I were willing participants in their schemes. He had a point, but something still felt off. And the Westlake Development Project? The bid is due in 4 days. Harrington and Carlton are the two leading contenders.
Yes.
The bid. Marcus rose and walked to his desk, returning with a thick folder. I propose a joint venture. Harrington Carlton Partners submits a single bid, combining our strengths. We both win, and we present a united front against those who tried to play us against each other. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. A joint venture? It was either brilliant or insane. The board would never agree, I said finally. They will when they understand the alternative, Marcus countered. Thomas Reed is in custody, but his partners are still out there. They have influence, Martha. Influence that could destroy Harrington Construction if you try to fight them alone. And if I agree to this partnership, what then? Then we go to the FBI together. Present all the evidence Edward gathered, plus what I've accumulated independently. We position ourselves as whistleblowers, not victims or accomplices. It made strategic sense, but my instincts were still screaming caution. I need time to consider this. And to consult with my children. Of course. Marcus glanced at his watch. But don't take too long. The Westlake bid deadline is approaching, and more importantly, Veronica Winters is still out there. And if I had to guess, she's not happy about your very public challenge to her yesterday. I thought about the text message she'd sent after the will reading. This isn't over. And it wasn't not by a long shot. One more question, I said as I gathered my purse. The night of Edward's funeral, Veronica came to my home and left a black envelope with the message, "This isn't over." Was that part of your surveillance, or was she acting independently? Marcus frowned. I had no knowledge of that, which suggests she was already playing both sides, even then. As the private elevator carried me back down to the lobby, I tried to process everything I'd learned. If Marcus was telling the truth, Edward had been involved in something far more dangerous than I'd imagined. Not just corporate espionage or financial crimes, but a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of city government. And I was now squarely in the crosshairs of whoever was behind it. Outside the Carlton building, I called Rebecca. How did it go? She asked immediately. It's complicated. Where are you? Just finishing with James Benson. He's been reviewing the documents from the USB drive. And she lowered her voice. Mom, it's bad. Really bad. Benson says there's enough evidence here to put Thomas away for decades, but also to implicate Uncle William and at least half a dozen other prominent figures. What does he recommend?
FBI.
Immediately. Before anyone else disappears or evidence starts vanishing. I thought about Marcus's proposal, the joint venture, the united front. Was he genuinely offering protection, or Was there something else at play? Tell James to set up a meeting with the FBI, I decided. But discreetly. No official record yet. What about you? Where are you headed now?
Home, I said.
I need to change before I go to the office. The board will be in chaos after Thomas's arrest. Michael's there now, Rebecca assured me. He's keeping things under control. Good. And David? Any luck finding Veronica? Not yet. He's checking her last known address, but if Carlton is right about her disappearing. Keep me posted, I said. And Rebecca? Be careful. All of you. As I hailed a taxi, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The morning crowd streamed past on the sidewalk, ordinary people heading to ordinary jobs, oblivious to the web of corruption and betrayal that had ensnared my family. The taxi pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic. I glanced back at the Carlton building towering behind us, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun. Marcus Carlton stood at his penthouse window, watching my departure. Even from this distance, I could feel the intensity of his gaze. Friend or foe? Ally or manipulator? I still couldn't be sure. The taxi driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Where to, ma'am? I gave him my address, then settled back against the seat, mentally preparing for the day ahead. But as we turned onto the expressway, I noticed a black SUV merge into traffic behind us, maintaining a consistent distance. Excuse me, I said to the driver. Could you take the next exit and then get back on the expressway going the other direction? He frowned but complied. The SUV followed. Is there a problem, ma'am? The driver asked, now watching the rearview mirror with concern. I'm not sure, I admitted. Could you make another turn? Any direction. He took a sharp right at the next intersection. The SUV did the same. We were definitely being followed. Drive to the nearest police station, I instructed, my heart racing. Quickly, please. The driver nodded grimly and accelerated. The SUV stayed with us, closing the gap. As we approached a red light, the taxi slowed. The SUV pulled alongside us in the next lane. The tinted window rolled down, revealing a face I recognized immediately. Howard Jenkins, Carlton Industries' missing CFO. Beside him sat Veronica Winters, her expression cold and calculating as she raised what looked like a gun. Run the light, I shouted to the driver. He hesitated for a split second, then stomped on the accelerator. The taxi lurched forward just as Veronica fired. The back window exploded in a shower of glass. I ducked down, covering my head as the driver swerved wildly through the intersection, horns blaring around us. Jesus Christ, the driver yelled. They're shooting at us. Police station, I reminded him, staying low in the seat. As fast as you can. The taxi careened through traffic, running another light, then another. I risked a glance back. The SUV was still in pursuit, but had fallen back slightly.
My phone rang.
Unknown number. With shaking hands, I answered. You should have stayed out of it, Martha. Veronica's voice, cold and precise. This was never about you. It became about me the moment you threatened me at my husband's funeral, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the terror coursing through me. She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. That was just business. What's happening now is survival. The police are tracking this call, I bluffed. They'll be waiting for you. No, they won't, she said confidently. Because we're not going to catch you today. This was just a warning. Next time, I won't miss. The line went dead. I looked back again. The SUV had disappeared. The taxi driver was still speeding, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Ma'am, who the hell are you? What kind of trouble are you in? The kind you don't want to be involved in, I said grimly. Just get me to the police station. Please. 2 hours later, I sat in an interview room at the downtown precinct, recounting my story to Detective Lisa Chin, the same detective who had questioned me about the corporate espionage allegations. Her expression remained professionally neutral as I described the chase and the phone call from Veronica. And you're certain it was Howard Jenkins driving the vehicle? She asked, making notes. Positive. I've met him at company functions. And Ms. Winters was the one who fired at your taxi? Yes. Detective Chen set down her pen and studied me. Mrs. Harrington, in the span of 3 days, you've become central to allegations of corporate espionage, had your former business partner arrested for breaking into your home, and now been shot at in broad daylight. Would you care to tell me what's really going on? I hesitated. How much could I safely reveal? Without the FBI involved yet, I couldn't be certain who might be compromised within local law enforcement. It's complicated, I said finally. I'm sure it is, she replied dryly. But attempted murder tends to simplify things. I need to know what you're involved in if I'm going to help protect you. Before I could respond, the door opened and Rebecca burst in, followed by a tall, austere man in an impeccable suit.
Mom.
Are you all right? Rebecca rushed to my side, examining me for injuries. I'm fine, I assured her. Just shaken. The man in the suit stepped forward. Detective Chen, I'm James Benson, the Harrington family attorney. I'll be representing Mrs. Harrington from this point forward. Chen frowned. This is an active attempted murder investigation, Mr. Benson. Your client is the victim, not a suspect. Nevertheless, he replied smoothly, given the complexity of the situation and the potential connections to other ongoing investigations, Mrs. Harrington will be exercising her right to legal counsel during all further questioning. Chen looked like she wanted to argue but thought better of it.
Fine.
But I still need details about why someone is trying to kill her. Benson glanced at me. I nodded slightly. Detective, he said, turning back to Chen, what I'm about to tell you is sensitive information related to an ongoing federal investigation. I need your assurance that this stays within this room until the appropriate authorities are notified. Chen's eyebrows rose. Federal investigation?
Yes.
Specifically, an FBI probe into money laundering, corruption, and racketeering involving several prominent local officials and business leaders. He proceeded to outline the broad strokes of what we'd discovered: Thomas Reed's criminal activities, Judge Hargrove's involvement, the connection to the Westlake Development Project. He was careful to position Edward and me as unwitting victims who had stumbled upon the conspiracy. When he finished, Chen sat back in her chair, her expression troubled. This is way above my pay grade. Indeed, Benson agreed. Which is why Mrs. Harrington will be meeting with FBI agents this afternoon. In the meantime, she needs protection. The individuals behind this will not stop with one failed attempt. Chen nodded. I'll arrange for a patrol car outside her residence and an officer to escort her to the FBI meeting. Thank you, I said sincerely. As Chen left to make the arrangements, Rebecca hugged me tightly. Michael and David are outside. They're frantic. Michael wants to hire private security. That might not be a bad idea, Benson commented. At least until the FBI takes official action. I thought about Marcus Carlton's warning. They have influence, Martha. Influence that could destroy Harrington Construction if you try to fight them alone. James, I said, what do you know about Marcus Carlton? Benson frowned. Richard Carlton's son? Not much personally. His reputation is mixed. Brilliant businessman, but ruthless. Some say he's even more aggressive than his father was. He claims he's been working with Edward to expose the corruption. That he wants to form a partnership with Harrington Construction, a joint bid for the Westlake project. Benson's frown deepened. I'd be extremely cautious about any such arrangement, Martha. Carlton Industries has been Harrington's chief competitor for decades. This sudden desire for cooperation seems convenient, especially given the circumstances. My thoughts exactly, I agreed. But if what he says about Edward is true, even if it is, Rebecca interjected, that doesn't mean Carlton's motivations are pure. He could be using this situation to gain control of Harrington through the back door. She was right, of course. In business, as in life, very few things were as straightforward as they seemed. Edward had taught me that much over the years. We proceed carefully, I decided. Meet with the FBI as planned. Share what we know, but keep Carlton's proposal to ourselves for now. And in the meantime, we need to find Veronica Winters before she finds me again. Detective Chen returned with news that a patrol car was ready to escort us home. As we prepared to leave, my phone rang again. Unknown number. With Benson and Rebecca watching anxiously, I answered on speaker. Martha. Marcus Carlton's voice. I just heard about what happened. Are you all right? How did you hear? I asked sharply. I have sources in the police department, he replied, not bothering to deny it. Is it true? Veronica Winters tried to kill you. She fired at my taxi, yes. He swore under his breath. This changes everything. They're accelerating their timeline. You need protection, real protection, not a patrol car sitting outside your house. I have my family, I said. And the FBI is getting involved this afternoon. The FBI moves slowly, Martha. Bureaucracy, protocols, chain of command, all things Veronica doesn't concern herself with. Let me help you. I have resources, people who can keep you safe until this is resolved. I glanced at Benson, who was shaking his head emphatically. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Carlton, but I think we have the situation under control. You don't, he said bluntly, but I can't force you to accept my help. Just be careful. And check your email. I've sent you something you need to see before you meet with the FBI. After the call ended, Rebecca looked at me with concern. Mom, I don't trust him. This whole situation feels like we're being manipulated. I agree, I said. But that doesn't mean the information he's providing isn't valuable. Let's see what he sent. I opened my email on my phone. There was indeed a message from Marcus Carlton, containing only a video attachment. I played it with Rebecca and Benson watching over my shoulder. The video showed a restaurant, upscale, dimly lit. At a corner table sat Judge William Hargrove, my brother-in-law, deep in conversation with Thomas Reed. The timestamp showed it was from just 3 days ago, after Edward's funeral, before Thomas's arrest. There was no audio, but the body language was clear. This was no casual dinner between family friends. Both men looked tense, Thomas repeatedly checking his surroundings as if worried about being observed. At one point, Hargrove slid a small envelope across the table, which Thomas quickly pocketed. Is that what I think it is? Rebecca whispered. A payoff, Benson confirmed grimly. Or perhaps blackmail. Either way, it confirms the connection between Reed and Hargrove. The video continued. As the men prepared to leave, a third figure approached their table. Howard Jenkins, Carlton Industries CFO. He joined them briefly, said something that made Hargrove visibly angry, then departed. Moments later, Hargrove and Reed left separately. The video ended, followed by a text message from Carlton. There's more where this came from. Edward wasn't the only one gathering evidence. I closed the email, my mind racing. If Carlton had evidence like this, why hadn't he gone to the authorities himself? Why involve me at all? Unless he needed something only I could provide. Something on the USB drive Edward had left for me. We need to review everything on that drive again, I told Benson. Every file, every email. There's something there that Carlton wants, something important enough that he's willing to share his own evidence to get it. I'll have my team do a complete analysis, Benson promised. In the meantime, let's get you home. You need rest before the FBI meeting. Rest was the last thing on my mind, but I nodded anyway. The events of the morning had left me physically and emotionally drained. A few hours to regroup, to strategize with my children and legal counsel, would not be unwelcome. The patrol car followed us home, where Michael and David were waiting anxiously. After reassuring them I was unharmed, we gathered in Edward's study, now my command center in this personal war, to assess our situation. Private security is on the way, Michael reported. Ex-military, highly recommended. They'll maintain a perimeter around the house and escort you wherever you need to go. I spoke with the FBI, Benson added. 2 agents will meet us here at 4 o'clock. They're very interested in what we have to share. And I might have a lead on Veronica, David said, holding up his phone. She hasn't completely disappeared. Her credit card was used an hour ago at a hotel downtown. After she shot at me? I asked incredulously. She's that brazen? It might be a trap, Rebecca warned. If she wanted you to know where she is? Or she's getting sloppy, Michael countered. Desperate people make mistakes. I thought about Veronica's cold voice on the phone. This was just a warning. Next time, I won't miss. She hadn't sounded desperate. She had sounded confident, controlled. We let the FBI handle Veronica, I decided. It's too dangerous for any of us to approach her directly. Speaking of dangerous, Michael said, what about Carlton? Can we trust anything he says or offers? I recounted my meeting with Marcus in detail, including his proposal for a joint venture on the Westlake project. As expected, Michael was vehemently opposed. It's a takeover attempt, he insisted. He's using this crisis to gain control of Dad's company. Or he genuinely wants to protect both companies from the fallout of this scandal, Rebecca suggested, playing devil's advocate. A united front makes strategic sense. Either way, Benson interjected, any such arrangement would require board approval. And given Thomas Reed's arrest and the current instability, I doubt the board would approve a major structural change right now. Unless they're desperate, David pointed out. The Westlake bid is huge. If they think we'll lose it because of the scandal. He had a point. Fear was a powerful motivator in business. The board might see Carlton's proposal as a lifeline rather than a trap. We need leverage, I said, thinking aloud. Something that gives us the upper hand with both Carlton and the board. Like what? Michael asked. I turned to Benson. The original Westlake bid documents, the ones before they were tampered with. Would they still exist somewhere in the company records? Benson considered this.
Possibly.
Edward was meticulous about documentation. He might have kept backups. Find them, I instructed. If we can recreate the original bid without Carlton's help, we maintain our independence. As my children and Benson discussed search strategies, I stepped away to the window, looking out at the manicured lawn where I'd hosted countless company picnics over the decades. Edward and I had built this life together, the company, the home, the family. I wouldn't let anyone take it away, not Thomas Reed, not Veronica Winters, and certainly not Marcus Carlton if his intentions proved less than honorable. My phone buzzed with a text message. David Harrington, my youngest. I frowned, turning to where he sat across the room. David, why are you texting me when we're in the same room? He looked up, confused. I'm not. A chill ran down my spine as I checked the message. Nice security detail. But they're looking outward, not inward. Check your bedroom. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. Mom, Rebecca was instantly at my side. What is it? Veronica, I whispered. She's been in the house. Michael was already moving, signaling the others to stay with me as he raced upstairs. We heard his footsteps above us, moving from room to room. Then silence. Michael. I called, my voice tight with fear. No response. David moved toward the door, but Benson caught his arm.
Wait.
Call for backup first. Before David could reach for his phone, Michael appeared in the doorway, his face ashen. Mom, you need to see this. The security detail had arrived while we were talking and now accompanied us upstairs, weapons drawn. They cleared each room before allowing us to enter. When we reached the master bedroom, my bedroom, I understood Michael's expression. On the bed, carefully arranged on Edward's side, was a woman's dress. Black silk. The dress Veronica had worn to the funeral. Beside it lay the diamond bracelet she had flaunted, the one Edward had given me for Christmas. And on the pillow, a single red rose with a note. He loved me in this. Said you were too old to wear silk like this anymore. Such a shame he died before we could be together properly. Sleep tight, Martha. Sweet dreams. The violation was so profound, so intimate, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. She had been in my home, in my bedroom, touching my things, desecrating the space I had shared with Edward for decades. How did she get in? David demanded of the security team. The house was locked. There are officers outside. Check all the entries, the lead security officer ordered his team. Windows, doors, everything. As they dispersed, I sank onto the edge of the bed, as far from Veronica's obscene display as possible. She's trying to unnerve you, Rebecca said gently, sitting beside me. To make you emotional, irrational. It's working, I admitted, my voice barely audible. Michael was pacing, his expression thunderous. We're moving you to a hotel.
Now.
This house isn't safe. No. I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my tone. This is my home. Edward's home. I won't be driven out by her psychological games. Mom, she had a gun this morning, David reminded me. This isn't just psychological. All the more reason to stay put, I argued. She knows where I live. If I go to a hotel, she'll find me there too, and I'll be in unfamiliar surroundings without the security measures we can implement here. The security team returned with their report. No signs of forced entry. Somehow, Veronica had a key or knew how to bypass our locks. Change every lock in the house, I instructed. Install additional security. Cameras, motion sensors, whatever it takes. This is my home, and I'm not leaving. My children exchanged worried glances, but didn't argue further. They knew that tone. It was the same one I'd used when they were teenagers testing boundaries. The discussion was closed. The FBI agents arrived precisely at 4 o'clock. Agents Diaz and Keller were everything one would expect from federal investigators. Efficient, professional, and completely unreadable. They listened without interruption as Benson and I laid out the evidence we had gathered: Thomas Reed's money laundering operation, Judge Hargrove's involvement, the attempted sabotage of the Westlake bid, and Veronica's role in it all. When we finished, Agent Diaz spoke first. Mrs. Harrington, the evidence you've presented is compelling, but there are still significant gaps. We need the complete picture before we can move forward with arrests and indictments. What gaps? I asked. You have financial records, emails, video surveillance. We need direct evidence linking Judge Hargrove to the money laundering operation, Agent Keller explained. The video Mr. Carlton provided shows a meeting, possibly an exchange of money, but without audio or context. It's not definitive. And Ms. Winters, Diaz added, while she clearly threatened you and may have fired at your taxi, her connection to the larger conspiracy is circumstantial at best. I stared at them in disbelief. She was working for my husband to gather evidence. Then she switched sides and started working with Thomas Reed. Now she's trying to kill me. How is that circumstantial? Because we don't have her testimony or direct evidence of her communications with Reed or Hargrove, Keller said patiently. What we need is someone on the inside who can testify to the entire operation. An informant, Benson clarified. Diaz nodded.
Exactly.
Someone like Thomas Reed, for example, if he were willing to cooperate in exchange for leniency. You want to cut a deal with the man who betrayed my husband and tried to attack me in my own home? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. We want to bring down the entire operation, Diaz replied evenly. Sometimes that means making uncomfortable compromises. I thought about it. Thomas was facing serious charges for the break-in alone, not to mention whatever financial crimes the FBI could prove. He might be desperate enough to cooperate. What would this deal entail? I asked reluctantly. Reduced charges, possibly a lighter sentence recommendation, Keller explained, in exchange for his complete cooperation and testimony against all other parties involved. I looked at Benson, who gave a slight nod. From a legal perspective, it made sense. From a personal one, it felt like another betrayal. Fine, I said finally. Approach him. But I want assurances that he serves time for what he's done. No slap on the wrist. We'll do our best, Diaz promised, though his tone offered no guarantees. After the agents left with copies of all our evidence, I felt oddly deflated. I had expected immediate action, arrests, indictments, justice. Instead, we were entering a new phase of careful negotiation and legal maneuvering. What now? I asked Benson. Now we wait, he replied. The FBI will move at their own pace. In the meantime, we focus on protecting you and salvaging the Westlake bid. And Veronica? The FBI will be looking for her, he assured me. With the attempted shooting and the break-in here, they have plenty of reason to bring her in for questioning. But I wasn't convinced. Veronica had evaded capture so far, and her bold moves suggested she wasn't concerned about law enforcement. She had her own agenda, and I was increasingly certain it went beyond money or covering her tracks. This was personal for her, and that made her infinitely more dangerous. As evening fell, my children reluctantly prepared to leave. The security team had established a rotation, with 2 guards inside the house and 2 patrolling the grounds at all times. Additional cameras had been installed, monitoring every entry point and major room. "I still think you should come stay with one of us," Rebecca said as she hugged me goodbye. "I'm safer here," I insisted. "The security team knows this house now, and Veronica won't be able to get in again." "Call if you need anything," Michael instructed. "Doesn't matter what time." "I will," I promised. "Now go home to your families. They need you too." After they left, the house fell into an eerie silence broken only by the occasional murmured communication between security guards. I wandered from room to room, unable to settle, my mind racing with questions and theories. In Edward's study, I found myself drawn to the painting that had concealed his secret safe. The Wyeth landscape, a desolate winter scene with a solitary farmhouse in the distance. I had always thought it melancholy, but Edward had seen something else in it. "It's about endurance," he had told me once. "Surviving the harshest season, knowing spring will come again." I needed some of that endurance now. On impulse, I swung the painting aside and opened the safe again, though I knew it was empty. I had taken the USB drive and Edward's note, and there had been nothing else inside. Or so I thought. As I ran my fingers along the interior, I felt a slight irregularity in the back panel. Pressing harder, I was surprised when the panel gave way, revealing a hidden compartment behind. Inside was a single key with a tag attached. The tag bore a series of numbers, coordinates, I realized after a moment. Edward had left something else for me to find. Something hidden somewhere only I would look. I returned to the laptop and entered the coordinates into a mapping application. They led to a location about an hour outside the city, a storage facility near the lake where we had kept our boat before selling it years ago. I stared at the screen, debating. It was already dark, and after the events of the day, venturing out alone seemed foolhardy at best. But whatever Edward had hidden there might be crucial to understanding the full scope of what we were facing. I could wait until morning, take my security detail with me. That would be the sensible course of action. But something told me time was running out. Veronica's escalating aggression, the FBI's deliberate pace, Marcus Carlton's cryptic warnings, all suggested that events were accelerating towards some unavoidable confrontation. I needed to know what Edward had left for me, and I needed to know now. Decision made, I called for one of the security guards. "I need to go out," I informed him. "It's important," he frowned. "Ma'am, given the circumstances, that's not advisable after dark." "That's why you're coming with me," I replied, slipping the key into my pocket. "2 of you. The others can remain here to secure the house." He still looked dubious, but nodded. "Where are we going?" "To find the last piece of the puzzle," I said, heading for the door. "And hopefully, a way to end this once and for all." The drive to the storage facility was tense, but uneventful. My security detail, former military men named Jensen and Ramirez, maintained vigilant silence, scanning the road behind us for any sign of pursuit. I directed them to the coordinates, my mind churning with possibilities. What had Edward hidden that required such elaborate precautions? The storage facility was small and isolated, perched on a bluff overlooking the lake. At night, with only a few security lights illuminating the rows of identical units, it had an eerie, abandoned quality that set my nerves on edge. Jensen parked near the office, which was closed for the night. "Which unit, ma'am?" I checked the tag on the key. "Unit 17B. Ramirez consulted the facility map posted near the entrance. "This way." We moved carefully through the rows, our footsteps crunching on gravel. The moon cast long shadows between the buildings, creating perfect hiding places for anyone who might be watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. Unit 17B was at the end of a row, partially hidden by an overgrown hedge. The padlock was rusty from exposure to the lake air, but the key turned smoothly enough. Jensen lifted the rolling door with a metallic groan that seemed deafening in the night silence. The beam from Ramirez's flashlight illuminated a space, mostly empty except for a single object in the center, a large fireproof safe, about the size of a small refrigerator. "Edward always was thorough," I murmured, approaching the safe. The key in my hand fit its lock perfectly. Inside were several items: a thick manila envelope, a small recording device, and a handgun in a holster. Jensen eyed the gun with professional interest. Your husband was expecting trouble. Apparently. I agreed, though the sight of the weapon disturbed me. Edward had never owned a gun to my knowledge. That he had acquired one and hidden it here spoke volumes about the danger he believed we faced. I opened the envelope first. It contained financial records, account numbers, transaction histories, wire transfers, all documenting the flow of money through various shell companies and offshore accounts. Many of the transactions originated from a company I didn't recognize, Meridian Holdings. What is this? Ramirez asked, peering over my shoulder. Evidence, I replied. More complete than what we already had. This traces the money all the way back to its source. The recording device was next, a small digital recorder with a single audio file saved. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Edward's voice filled the small storage unit, sending a wave of emotion through me so powerful I had to lean against the safe for support. Martha, if you're listening to this, then things have gone very wrong. I hoped to resolve this situation before it touched you or our family, but I've been forced to consider the possibility that I might not succeed. There was a pause, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. I could picture him in his study, recording this after everyone else had gone to bed. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but you deserve the truth. The corruption you've discovered goes beyond Thomas Reed and William Hargrove. It reaches all the way to the mayor's office and involves several prominent business leaders in the city. Another pause, longer this time, including Marcus Carlton. I gasped, exchanging shocked glances with Jensen and Ramirez. Despite what he may tell you, Marcus is not an unwitting victim or a crusader for justice. He has been the architect of this entire operation from the beginning. Meridian Holdings is his company, a shell corporation he established to hide his involvement. The evidence in this safe proves it conclusively. Edward's voice grew more urgent. Martha, be careful. Trust no one outside our immediate family. Not Thomas, not James Benson, and especially not Marcus Carlton. He will try to use you to recover this evidence, which is the only direct link connecting him to the money laundering operation. I thought about Carlton's insistence on meeting me alone, his convenient evidence against Thomas and Hargrove, his proposal for a joint venture. He had been manipulating me from the start, positioning himself as an ally when he was actually the mastermind behind everything. There's one more thing you should know, Edward continued, his voice now heavy with what sounded like regret. About Veronica Winters. I tensed, bracing myself for the final betrayal, confirmation that their affair had been real, not just a cover story. She is not who she claims to be. Her real name is Victoria Weiss. She's a federal agent, working deep undercover to build a case against Carlton and his network. I've been cooperating with her and her team for months. The shock was so profound I nearly dropped the recorder. Veronica, Victoria, was a federal agent? But that made no sense. She had threatened me, shot at my taxi, broken into my home. By now, she may have been forced to take actions that seem hostile or threatening, Edward explained, as if anticipating my confusion. If her cover was compromised, she would have no choice but to maintain it, even if that meant appearing to target you. Trust that everything she does is part of her mission to bring down Carlton's operation and protect our family. I couldn't reconcile this information with the woman who had taunted me at Edward's funeral, who had left that cruel note on my pillow just hours ago. How could that be part of any legitimate law enforcement operation? The gun is for your protection, Edward continued. I pray you never need it, but given what we're facing, I wanted you to have it. Victoria can be trusted, but only in person, never over electronic communication which Carlton may be monitoring. The recognition phrase is, Edward always loved sailing at dawn. Her response should be, the light on the water reminds me of Venice. If she doesn't give that exact response, assume she's compromised. The recording ended abruptly, leaving me with more questions than answers. I sat back on my heels, trying to process everything I'd just learned. If Edward was right, then Marcus Carlton was the true villain, and Veronica, Victoria, was a federal agent working to bring him down. But that didn't explain her apparent vendetta against me. Unless it's a test, I said aloud, the realization dawning. She's testing whether I found this evidence, pushing me to look deeper, to follow Edward's trail to this storage unit. Or your husband was mistaken about where her loyalties truly lie, Jensen suggested grimly. It was possible. Edward had been sick, possibly not thinking clearly in his final weeks. But the level of detail in his recording, the specificity of the recognition phrase, it all suggested lucidity and careful planning. We need to get this evidence to the FBI, I decided, gathering everything back into the safe. Right away. As we secured the unit and headed back to the car, a new sense of urgency propelled me. If Marcus Carlton was truly behind everything, then he would be growing desperate as the FBI investigation progressed. And desperate men were dangerous. We were halfway back to the city when my phone rang. Rebecca. Mom, where are you? Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. I had to check something at a storage facility, I explained. What's wrong? It's David. He went looking for Veronica at that hotel downtown. He's not answering his phone, and his car is still in the parking lot, but the hotel staff haven't seen him in hours. My blood ran cold. Have you called the police? Yes, they're looking for him now. Michael's at the hotel too. I'm on my way, I said, signaling to Jensen to increase his speed. And Rebecca? Don't trust Marcus Carlton. Whatever he says, whatever he offers, he's behind all of this. There was a moment of stunned silence. How do you know? Edward left me proof. I'll explain everything when I see you. Just stay away from Carlton and anyone associated with him. As we raced toward the city, lights appearing on the horizon, I clutched the evidence from Edward's safe and prayed we weren't too late. If Carlton had David, if he was using my son as leverage, the game had just become infinitely more dangerous. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I was truly afraid. The hotel lobby bustled with activity when we arrived. Uniformed police officers, hotel security, and in the center of it all, Michael pacing like a caged animal. His face, when he spotted me, was a portrait of barely contained fury and fear. They've got nothing, he said before I could even ask. Security cameras showed David entering the elevator to Veronica's floor 3 hours ago. No footage of him leaving. What about Veronica? I asked, clutching Edward's evidence close to my chest.
Gone.
Room's empty. Paid in cash. Used a fake ID. Detective Chin approached, her expression grim. Mrs. Harrington, we've issued an APB for both your son and Veronica Winters. Every patrol car in the city has their descriptions. I pulled Chin aside, lowering my voice. Detective, there's something you need to know. Veronica Winters may not be who we think she is. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. Meaning? I have reason to believe she's a federal agent working undercover. I explained about Edward's recording and the evidence I'd just recovered. Chen's skepticism was evident. Mrs. Harrington, with all due respect, that seems unlikely given her actions toward you. Have you shared this theory with the FBI agents you met with? Not yet. I found this evidence after they left. She studied me for a moment. I'll make some calls, see if I can verify this information through channels. In the meantime, we continue treating Ms. Winters as a suspect in your son's disappearance. I nodded, though doubts were beginning to creep in. If Veronica, Victoria, was truly a federal agent, why would she abduct David? It made no sense, unless she hadn't taken him at all. Detective, I said slowly, we need to consider the possibility that Marcus Carlton is behind David's disappearance. Carlton? The CEO of Carlton Industries. Chun frowned. What would he have to gain? I showed her the financial records from Edward's safe. According to evidence my husband gathered, Carlton is the mastermind behind the entire money laundering operation. He's been manipulating everyone, the police, even the FBI, to protect himself. Chun examined the documents with growing concern. This is substantial, but it doesn't explain why he would target your son specifically. Leverage, Michael interjected, having moved close enough to overhear. He knows Mom has this evidence. He's using David to force her hand. As if summoned by our suspicions, my phone rang. Unknown number. Speaker, Chin instructed, gesturing for a nearby officer to begin tracing the call. I answered, my heart in my throat. Hello. Martha. Marcus Carlton's voice, smooth as ever. I understand you've had quite the evening. First, a mysterious trip to a storage facility, and now this unfortunate situation with your son. Ice formed in my veins. He'd been watching me, tracking my movements. Where is David? I demanded, abandoning any pretense. Safe for the moment. His continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation. If you hurt him... Please, Martha, spare me the maternal threats, Carlton interrupted. We both know you're in no position to make demands. Now, here's what's going to happen. You will bring me everything you recovered from that storage unit. Alone. No police, no FBI, no private security. Just you and Edward's evidence. And if I refuse? His laugh was cold, devoid of humor. Then the police will find pieces of your son scattered across the city, starting with his right hand, which I'll have delivered to your home within the hour. Bile rose in my throat. You're bluffing. Am I? David, say hello to your mother. There was a shuffling sound, then my son's voice, strained but clear. Mom, don't. His words cut off with a muffled cry of pain. Stop, I pleaded. I'll bring you what you want. Just don't hurt him. Excellent. Carlton's tone was businesslike now. The old boathouse at Lakeview Park. 1 hour. Come through the east entrance, on foot, alone. If I detect any police presence, any surveillance, any attempt at heroics, well, I think I've made the consequences clear. The line went dead. Chin immediately turned to the officer who had been tracing the call. Anything? The officer shook his head. Signal was bouncing between multiple towers. Impossible to pinpoint. He's bluffing, Michael insisted, though his face had gone ashen. He wouldn't dare hurt David. It would only incriminate him further. We can't take that chance, I said. You hurt him. He's desperate. And desperate men are the most dangerous, Chin agreed. But Mrs. Harrington, you cannot meet him alone. It's too risky. I don't see that I have a choice. I clutched the evidence from Edward's safe. He wants this. If I don't bring it to him, he'll kill David. Chun studied me thoughtfully. Perhaps there's a third option. One that gives Carlton what he wants while ensuring both your safety and your son's. She outlined a plan, risky, with multiple potential points of failure, but also our best chance at rescuing David and apprehending Carlton without surrendering Edward's evidence. It could work, Michael acknowledged reluctantly, but it puts Mom directly in danger. I've been in danger since the moment Edward died, I pointed out. At least this way, we take the fight to Carlton on our terms. As we finalized the details, Rebecca arrived, breathless with worry. I quickly brought her up to speed on David's abduction and our plan to rescue him. It's too dangerous, she protested. There has to be another way. If you have a better idea, I'm listening, I said gently. But we're running out of time. She didn't, of course. None of us did. Carlton had outmaneuvered us at every turn, staying one step ahead. Now he held my son's life in his hands, and the only card I had left to play was Edward's evidence, the same evidence that could finally bring Carlton to justice. Sometimes, the only way to win is to appear to lose. 50 minutes later, I stood at the east entrance to Lakeview Park, a familiar place that now seemed alien and threatening in the darkness. The park had closed at dusk, but the gate was unlocked. Carlton's doing, no doubt. In my hand was a slim briefcase containing Edward's evidence. Around my neck, concealed beneath my blouse, was a wireless microphone small enough to be virtually undetectable. We'll be monitoring every word, Chin had assured me. The moment we confirm David's presence and Carlton's confession, we move in. And if something goes wrong?
I had asked.
Her expression had been grim. Then we improvise. Now, as I made my way along the deserted path toward the old boathouse, every shadow seemed to harbor a threat, every rustle of leaves a potential attacker. The night was unusually still, the moon partially obscured by clouds, casting everything in a silvery half-light that distorted familiar landmarks. The boathouse loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the shimmer of the lake beyond. Its wooden dock extended into the water, like a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the opposite shore. In the summer, this place would be bustling with activity, families renting paddle boats, children feeding ducks, couples strolling hand in hand. Now it stood empty and foreboding, the perfect setting for the final act in Carlton's twisted drama. I approached cautiously, scanning for any sign of David or Carlton. The boathouse door was ajar, a thin line of light spilling onto the weathered planks of the dock. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing across the water. "I'm here, alone, as you requested." For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door swung open fully, revealing Marcus Carlton standing in the threshold. He was impeccably dressed as always, though he had exchanged his business suit for more casual attire, dark pants, a black turtleneck, leather gloves. The clothes of a man prepared for dirty work. "Martha," he greeted me with the smooth confidence of someone who believed victory was already his. "Right on time. I appreciate punctuality in all my business dealings." "Where's my son?" I demanded, staying where I was. Carlton stepped aside, revealing the interior of the boathouse. David sat on a wooden chair, his hands bound behind him, a gag in his mouth. A tall man in a dark suit stood behind him, one hand resting casually on David's shoulder. Even from this distance, I could see the bruise forming on my son's cheek where someone had struck him. "As you can see, he's perfectly fine," Carlton said. A bit uncomfortable perhaps, but unharmed. Mostly. I took a step forward, but Carlton raised a hand to stop me. "Not so fast. The evidence first." I held up the briefcase. "It's all here. Everything Edward gathered about your operation. Financial records, offshore accounts, proof that Meridian Holdings is your shell company." A flicker of surprise crossed Carlton's face. "You've been busy." Edward was more thorough than I gave him credit for. "He knew what you were, what you're still doing." Carlton smiled thinly. "What I'm doing, Martha, is creating a legacy. This city has been controlled by the same families, the same interests for generations. The Harringtons, the Reeds, the Hargroves, all taking your piece of the pie while pretending to be pillars of the community. By laundering money through fraudulent development projects?" I countered. "By corrupting public officials? That's not a legacy, Marcus. It's a criminal enterprise." He shrugged, unconcerned. "Semantics. The point is, I saw an opportunity to change the power structure. Your husband recognized my ambition but lacked the vision to be part of it. Instead, he chose to play the hero, gathering evidence, preparing to expose me. And when he got sick, you saw another opportunity," I said, the pieces falling into place. "You used Veronica to spy on him, to find out how much he knew and who he had told." Carlton's expression darkened. "Veronica. Now, there's a complication I didn't anticipate. She was supposed to be a simple tool, seduce Edward, gain his trust, report back to me. I never expected her to develop a conscience." "What are you talking about? Your husband's recording didn't tell you everything, did he?" Carlton smirked. "Veronica Winters is indeed Victoria Weiss, a federal agent. But she wasn't working with Edward from the beginning. I recruited her, turned her. At least, I thought I had." My mind raced to process this new information. "You're saying she was corrupt? Working for you while pretending to be FBI?" "Initially, yes. Money is a powerful motivator, especially for an underpaid federal agent with expensive tastes. But somewhere along the line, Edward got to her, appealed to her better nature, or whatever romantic notion you prefer. She agreed to double-cross me, to help him build a case. Then why has she been threatening me? Why shoot at my taxi?" Carlton laughed. "Because, my dear Martha, she's playing both sides again. When Edward died, she saw an opportunity to cash in one final time. She came to me, offered to find whatever evidence Edward had hidden in exchange for a significant payday. the threats against you, the shooting, all designed to motivate you to find the evidence yourself, to do the work for her. It was almost too much to process. Victoria/Veronica as a corrupt agent, then Edward's ally, then a free agent looking for one last score. No wonder I couldn't make sense of her actions. Enough talk, Carlton said, extending his hand. The briefcase.
Now.
Or David suffers the consequences. I stepped forward, crossing the remaining distance to the boathouse. As I placed the briefcase in Carlton's outstretched hand, I caught David's eye. He was trying to tell me something, blinking rapidly in a pattern I recognized from his childhood, Morse code. We had learned it together during a summer when he was obsessed with spy novels. 3 short blinks, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. No, not SOS, something else. A warning. Behind. I whirled just as a figure emerged from the shadows at the side of the boathouse. Veronica Winters, dressed all in black, a gun held casually at her side. Perfect timing. Carlton greeted her. We were just discussing your complicated loyalties. Marcus, she acknowledged coolly, her eyes never leaving mine. I see you've finally met with Mrs. Harrington. Did you tell her the whole story, or just the parts that paint you in a favorable light? I was explaining your remarkable talent for playing all sides against the middle, he replied. A skill I've come to admire, even as it complicates my plans. Veronica, or Victoria, moved to stand beside me, still facing Carlton. And what are those plans exactly? Take the evidence, eliminate the witnesses, disappear to some country without extradition? Something like that, he admitted, though I prefer to think of it as strategic relocation. The business climate here has become inhospitable. This bizarre conversation was happening as if my son weren't bound and gagged just feet away, as if we were at some corporate cocktail party instead of a deserted boathouse in the middle of the night. My son, I said, interrupting their exchange. Let him go. You have what you wanted. Carlton regarded me with something like pity. I'm afraid that's not possible, Martha. David has seen our faces, heard our conversation. Letting him walk away would be poor risk management. Then you'll have to kill me too, I stated flatly, because I won't leave without him. That was always the plan, Carlton replied with chilling casualness. You, David, Ms. Winters here, all loose ends that need to be tied up before I depart. You're forgetting something, Veronica said, her voice taking on a new edge. I'm the one holding a gun. Carlton smiled, unperturbed. Are you really going to shoot me, Victoria? After all we've been through? All the money I've paid you? The money was good, she acknowledged. But there are some lines even I won't cross. Murder is one of them. How noble, he sneered. And yet, you are willing to threaten Martha, to fire at her taxi. Warning shots, she interrupted, carefully aimed to miss. I needed her scared enough to find Edward's evidence, but not so terrified she'd go directly to the FBI. I stared at her in disbelief. The break-in at my house? The dress on my bed? Psychological warfare, she admitted, having the grace to look slightly ashamed. I'm not proud of it, but I needed you motivated. Finding Edward's evidence was crucial, and you were taking too long. For your own payday, I accused.
She shook her head.
For the case. I'm still federal, Martha. I never stopped being federal. Everything I've done, the threats, the mind games, even shooting at your taxi, was authorized as part of my deep cover operation. Enough. Carlton cut in, his composure finally cracking. This is all very touching, but we're wasting time. Jenkins, he addressed the man standing behind David, dispose of the son. I'll handle the women. Jenkins moved his hand from David's shoulder to his pocket, presumably for a weapon. But before he could withdraw it, the boathouse door behind him burst open, revealing Michael with a gun. Edward's gun from the storage unit, I realized with shock. Don't move, Michael ordered, his voice steady despite the wild fear in his eyes. Step away from my brother. Jenkins froze, then slowly raised his hands. Carlton, however, merely looked annoyed. Michael Harrington, always the protective older brother. But you're out of your depth here, son. That gun in your hand, I'd wager you've never fired one before. Never even held one until tonight. Doesn't mean I won't shoot you if you hurt my family, Michael replied, his aim never wavering. Such drama, Carlton sighed. Then, with shocking speed, he reached inside his jacket and withdrew his own weapon. Unfortunately for you, I have no such inexperience. Several things happened simultaneously. Carlton aimed at Michael. Veronica swung her gun toward Carlton. I lunged forward, driven by maternal instinct to protect my son. And from outside the boathouse came the sudden, overwhelming wail of police sirens, followed by the blinding glare of floodlights sweeping across the water. Police, drop your weapons. The building is surrounded. Carlton's face contorted with fury. You brought them, he snarled at me. After I specifically warned you. He swung his gun toward David, clearly intent on exacting revenge before his own capture. I threw myself between them without hesitation, bracing for the impact of a bullet that never came. Instead, there was a deafening crack as Veronica fired first. Carlton staggered backward, a look of almost comical surprise on his face as he stared down at the spreading crimson stain on his chest. You shot me, he said, his voice faint with disbelief. After everything. Consider it my resignation, Veronica replied coldly. Carlton crumpled to the floor just as police officers swarmed into the boathouse from all directions. In the chaos that followed, officers securing Jenkins, others rushing to Carlton's side, still others cutting David free from his restraints, I found myself face to face with Veronica Winters, or Victoria Weiss, or whoever she truly was. Edward always loved sailing at dawn, I said quietly, testing her. She smiled faintly. The light on the water reminds me of Venice. The recognition phrase. She had given the correct response. You really are federal, I whispered. I really am, she confirmed. Everything else was complicated. Before I could respond, Detective Chin appeared at my side. Mrs. Harrington, are you all right? Is David hurt? We're fine, I assured her, watching as my sons embraced across the room. Thanks to your plan. And to Agent Weiss, Chin added, nodding to Veronica. Though we're going to have a long conversation about jurisdictional courtesy and proper interdepartmental communication. Veronica, Victoria, had the grace to look chagrined. My cover was deep. Contact with local law enforcement would have compromised years of work. So would getting shot by a suspect because we didn't know you were one of the good guys, Chin retorted. As they continued their professional disagreement, I made my way to my sons. David was pale but unhurt apart from the bruise on his face and some abrasions on his wrists from the restraints. Mom, he breathed, pulling me into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you, not gone looking for Veronica on my own. It's over now, I soothed, stroking his hair as I had when he was a child. You're safe. That's all that matters. Michael stood beside us, Edward's gun now secured by the police. Carlton, he asked, his voice tight. Alive for now, I replied. The paramedics are working on him. Indeed, across the boathouse, emergency medical personnel were stabilizing Carlton for transport to the hospital. He would live to face justice, a more fitting punishment than the quick death he had planned for us. Outside, more sirens approached as additional police units and FBI agents converged on the scene. The operation to bring down Marcus Carlton and his network was now in full swing, with arrests being made across the city. Judge Hargrove had been taken into custody at his home. Thomas Reed, already in jail for the break-in at my house, was now facing additional charges. The conspiracy that had claimed Edward's peace of mind in his final months was finally being dismantled, and I had played a crucial role in making it happen. As dawn broke over the lake, casting the first golden rays across the water Edward had so loved, I stood on the dock watching the activity around me with a strange sense of detachment. The nightmare wasn't quite over. There would be statements to give, evidence to present, perhaps even testimony in court, but the immediate danger had passed. Victoria approached, having shed her Veronica persona like a snake discarding old skin. Her posture was different, her manner more direct and professional. Even her voice had changed, losing the affected purr she had used as Veronica. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. Several, actually. For threatening me? Breaking into my home? Shooting at my taxi? I suggested. All of the above. She had the grace to look genuinely remorseful. The operation required me to maintain my cover at all costs. Carlton was watching me constantly, testing my loyalty. If I had shown any softness toward you, you could have found another way, I said, the hurt still fresh despite my intellectual understanding of her position. The dress on my bed, the cruel note, that went beyond maintaining cover. She nodded, accepting the rebuke. You're right. I crossed a line. The Bureau will have its own opinions about my methods, I'm sure. Why didn't Edward tell me? I asked, the question that had been haunting me since I heard his recording. About you, about Carlton, about any of it? He wanted to, she said softly. Many times. But the risk was too great. Carlton had people everywhere, the police department, City Hall, even Edward's own company. The fewer people who knew the truth, the safer you all were. Except he died before he could see justice done, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. He died believing his partner had betrayed him, not knowing the full extent of Carlton's treachery. He died protecting you and your children, Victoria corrected gently. And he left you the means to finish what he started.
He believed in you, Martha.
More than you know. Her words struck a chord deep within me. Edward had trusted me with his legacy, with bringing down the corruption that had infected our city. He hadn't seen me as just his wife, the mother of his children, but as a partner capable of carrying on his fight. Thank you, I said finally, for telling me that, and for saving my son's life tonight. It doesn't erase what I put you through, she acknowledged. No, I agreed. But it's a start. As she walked away to confer with her FBI colleagues, Rebecca arrived, having been notified of the night's events. She rushed to embrace me, then David, then Michael, tears streaming down her face. I thought I'd lost you all, she sobbed. When they told me Carlton had taken David, that you were going to meet him alone. But she wasn't alone, Michael said proudly. Mom had a plan. And backup. He glanced at Victoria, who was now deep in conversation with Agent Diaz from the FBI. Is it really over? Rebecca asked, looking around at the police activity, the paramedics loading Carlton into an ambulance, the evidence being carefully catalogued and secured. Almost, I said, watching as the first rays of sunlight touched the Harrington Tower in the distance, making the glass facade gleam like a beacon. There's still one more thing to do. 3 days later, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel, facing a sea of reporters, cameras, and community leaders. Behind me sat my children, James Benson, and the board members of Harrington Construction who had survived the purge following Carlton's arrest. Notably absent were Thomas Reed, now facing multiple federal charges, and 3 other board members who had been implicated in the corruption scheme. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. Public speaking had always been Edward's domain, not mine.
But times had changed.
I had changed. 1 week ago, my late husband's company was accused of corporate espionage. Those allegations were part of a calculated effort to conceal the truth about a corruption network that reached into the highest levels of our city government and business community. I outlined the basics of Carlton's operation, the money laundering, the bribery, the manipulation of city contracts, careful to include only details that had already been made public by the FBI and local authorities. Edward Harrington discovered this corruption and spent the final months of his life gathering evidence, working with federal authorities to build a case. He did not live to see justice done, but his efforts have led to the dismantling of this criminal enterprise and the arrest of those responsible. Flashbulbs popped as photographers captured the moment. In the front row, Detective Chin nodded slightly, a gesture of respect from one woman to another. Today, I am announcing 2 initiatives to honor Edward's legacy. First, the establishment of the Edward Harrington Foundation for Ethical Business Practices, which will provide resources and support for whistleblowers who expose corporate corruption. Applause rippled through the audience. Second, I am formally withdrawing Harrington Construction from the Westlake Development Project bid. This announcement was met with murmurs of surprise. The Westlake project was worth millions, potentially billions over time. Withdrawing was a significant business decision that would impact the company's bottom line. Instead, I continued, we will be focusing our resources on a new initiative, the revitalization of the East Side community, beginning with affordable housing for working families and investment in local businesses. The East Side was the city's most neglected area, a former industrial zone now plagued by poverty and disinvestment. Edward had often spoken of wanting to make a difference there, but the profit margins were too slim to justify the investment to his board. This project will not generate the returns our shareholders have come to expect, I acknowledged frankly. But it will generate something more valuable, a lasting, positive impact on our community. That is the true legacy Edward would want for the company that bears his name. More applause, louder this time. In the back of the room, I spotted Victoria Weiss, now dressed in a conservative suit that screamed federal agent. She caught my eye and nodded once, a gesture of approval or perhaps farewell. After the press conference, as my children and I prepared to leave, James Benson approached with a concerned expression. Martha, while I applaud your philanthropic intentions, the board is concerned about the financial implications of abandoning the Westlake bid. As your legal counsel, I feel obligated to point out that shareholders might view this as a breach of fiduciary duty. The board approved my decision. I reminded him, unanimously. Under duress, he countered. The company is still reeling from the scandal. They're afraid to oppose you publicly right now, but that won't last forever. I smiled, patting his arm. James, I appreciate your concern. But Edward left me controlling interest in Harrington Construction for a reason. He trusted me to do what was right, not just what was profitable. And if the shareholders sue, then we'll face that challenge when it comes, I said serenely. But I suspect they won't. The publicity from our East Side initiative is already generating goodwill. 3 new clients have approached us since the announcement, specifically because they want to be associated with a company that prioritizes ethical practices and community investment. Benson looked skeptical but nodded. I hope you're right, for all our sakes. 6 months later, I stood on the construction site of what would become Harrington Commons, the first phase of our East Side revitalization project. Around me, workers in hard hats moved purposefully, laying the foundation for what would eventually be mixed-income housing, a community center, and space for local businesses. Michael, now serving as Chief Operating Officer of Harrington Construction, stood beside me, reviewing plans with the project manager. Rebecca, who had left her law firm to become the company's general counsel, was on a call with city officials about zoning variances. David, to everyone's surprise, including his own, had discovered a passion for urban planning and was now leading the design team for the entire East Side initiative. My children had found their places in the family business, not because I had pressured them, but because they believed in what we were doing. In the wake of the scandal and their father's death, they had discovered purpose in continuing his legacy of building, not just structures, but community. As for me, I had found a new identity beyond Edward's widow, or even majority shareholder. I was now an advocate, a philanthropist, and, according to a recent profile in Business Weekly, a force for ethical transformation in an industry often plagued by corruption. The trial of Marcus Carlton was scheduled to begin next month. Thomas Reed had already pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, his testimony helping to build cases against others in the network. Judge Hargrove had resigned in disgrace, currently awaiting his own day in court. Victoria Weiss had disappeared back into the shadowy world of undercover operations, though she had sent a single orchid to Edward's grave on the anniversary of his death. The card had read simply, "He would be proud of you all." And he would be, I thought, watching my children work together to bring our shared vision to life. Edward had built a company. We were building a legacy. The dress Veronica had left on my bed, that cruel reminder of Edward's betrayal that wasn't actually a betrayal, had been donated to charity. The sapphire pendant and diamond bracelet sold, the proceeds going to the foundation bearing Edward's name. I still lived in our home, though I had redecorated, making it truly mine for the first time. Edward's study was now my office, the Wyeth painting still hanging on the wall, though the safe behind it was empty. No more secrets, no more hidden evidence. Just memories of a man who, despite his flaws and the mistakes he had made, had loved his family enough to protect them even from beyond the grave. As the sun began to set over the construction site, casting long shadows across what would one day be a place of hope and renewal, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since Edward's death. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it was now accompanied by purpose, by pride in what we were accomplishing. "Mrs. Harrington?" One of the construction workers approached, hard hat in hand. "We found something during the excavation. Thought you might want to see it." He held out a tarnished metal object, an old pocket watch, its case dented but still intact. When I opened it, I found an inscription inside. "To William, with love, Elizabeth, 1902. There used to be houses here, back in the early 1900s, the worker explained. Before the factories came. Probably belonged to someone who lived in the neighborhood. I closed my fingers around the watch, this tangible connection to the past, to the families who had once called this area home before industry, and then neglect had transformed it. "Thank you," I told him. "We'll find a place for it in the community center." A reminder of the neighborhood's history. As he walked away, I remained holding the watch, thinking about time, how it changes us, reshapes us, sometimes destroys us, but also how it offers opportunities for renewal and redemption. Edward's time had run out too soon. He hadn't lived to see justice done or his vision for the company realized. But he had left behind the tools I needed to accomplish both. He had believed in me when I didn't yet believe in myself. "Mom," David called from across the site. "We're ready to go over the community center plans. Want to see them?" I slipped the pocket watch into my purse and smiled. "Absolutely. Lead the way." The sun dipped below the horizon as I followed my son toward the trailer serving as our temporary office. Behind us, the skeleton of Harrington Commons rose against the darkening sky, not just a building, but a testament to resilience, to transformation, to the power of turning grief into purpose. Edward had built his empire through determination and vision. I would honor that legacy not by preserving it unchanged, but by evolving it into something even more meaningful. Not just successful, but significant. That night, as I prepared for bed in the home that was now truly mine, I paused before the photograph of Edward and me on our 30th anniversary. We were laughing, champagne glasses raised in a toast, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. "We did it," I told his smiling image. "We beat them. All of them. And we're just getting started." I didn't expect an answer, of course. But as I turned out the light, I felt a sense of his presence, not as a ghost or a supernatural visitation, but as the enduring impact of a life well lived, a love that had transformed me, and a legacy that would continue through our children and the company that bore our name. Marcus Carlton had tried to destroy that legacy. Veronica Winters had manipulated and frightened me in the name of justice. Thomas Reed had betrayed decades of friendship for profit. Each had underestimated me, seeing only Edward's grieving widow, not the woman I had always been beneath that role, resilient, determined, and ultimately unstoppable when protecting what I loved. Their mistake, my triumph. As I drifted toward sleep, I smiled at the thought of Edward watching it all unfold, proud, perhaps a little surprised, but ultimately vindicated in his faith in me. The woman he had chosen not just as his wife, but as his heir in every sense that mattered. The widow who had not only survived, but conquered.
The end.